Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another live stream on History by Podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. James David Audlin, Christopher Lawson, and Douglas Del Tondo from the JesusWordsOnly YouTube channel. I'll have the link to his channel in the description below. I'll have a link to Dr. Audlin's books and Christopher Lawson's books as well, material. That being said, thank you all three of you for joining me today.
Pleasure.
We're gonna have a blast talking about today's topic, which is, was Paul the Apostle a Herodian Roman agent? So, first off, I think what we need to do is define what does Roman agent mean. Like, I don't think it means in this context that, okay, he's obviously not a military spy, because there's no evidence. I don't think there's any evidence of that for the Romans. There's no evidence of that in his letters. But are y'all basically saying something that I would be thinking in this context, that he is trying to alter the message of Jesus in the direction of pacifism? Like, hey guys, let's not be violent here. Let's, Jesus is the Messiah of peace. Obey the government. Romans 13. All governments are appointed by God. Is that what we mean by that stuff? I want y'all's perspective on that.
Well, I'll start then. I'll start by saying that Paul has to be considered. He claims to be a Roman citizen. At least twice we have that in the book of Acts, in Acts 15 and in Acts 21. He states that he's a Roman citizen, and the soldiers were questioning him and slapping him around during questioning, a typical Roman technique during questioning. And Paul says, "Do you have the right to do that to a Roman citizen?" And it scared the heck out of the Roman soldiers, because that's not like citizenship today. In time of Paul, citizenship was uncommon, and to have it from birth, like Paul claimed, was even more uncommon. And Paul mentioned that he had a relative named Herodian, so there's speculation is reasonable to say that perhaps Paul had his citizenship from birth because he is related to the Herodian family, and that would give him that advantage. Families who were close to the emperor got that kind of citizenship from birth. That's the exception. Otherwise, I believe you had to work 25 years in the Roman army to get your citizenship. And so that Paul would have this is exceptional. Today, we think of citizenship just as a common thing. We don't think of it as a rank, but it was a rank. And Paul was able to give a centurion orders, and the centurion then followed those orders. So that's a very serious rank if you can give centurions an order. So I think that's a starting point. What is a Roman citizen doing trying to infiltrate the Messianic movement? And at one point in Acts, it says that both Paul and Silas were Roman citizens. So here you've got a couple of Roman citizens in the Messianic movement, which is all Jewish. And Paul exhibits a very anti-Jewish attitude in all his letters, in all the way that he deals with other apostles. When you read what Paul's written about the other apostles, so-called apostles, he calls them. So you see that there's an antipathy there, that Paul is hostile to the original apostles. So he's in the movement, but he's hostile to the original apostles. So this tells me that Paul is acting in a manner that is pro-Roman, anti-Jewish, but is it authorized pro-Roman? I don't think so. I think it's more like a Herodian family member who is playing around and using his place of privilege to go and infiltrate these sectarians. And I see Paul as being very similar to Josephus in this way. Josephus was another privileged Jew who found a fascination with the Jewish sects. So I think Paul has had the same fascination that Josephus had, and he's got the same protection. At one point in Acts, it says that their Roman military came out to protect Paul. Why would they do that? Why would they save Paul? Why would they intervene with one Jew arguing with another Jew? Why wouldn't they just let it go on? Why would they have to go and risk antipathy in Jerusalem by going in and rescuing Paul? It tells me that he had some kind of high rank and some big time connections. And other clues, when he talks with Felix and Agrippa, he talks to them in a very familiar manner, like he's used to hanging out with the Roman hierarchy. And then when he needs protection and he's under arrest, he gets in prison in Herod's palace. How many people get to go to Herod's palace for protection? That seems to me like he's getting Herodian privilege and extended to him. And now, do these clues mean that Paul's a Roman agent? Well, let me ask you this. I'm a big Blue Jays fan. I have all the rookie cards of all the Blue Jays from Alomar to Zosky of every member of the Blue Jay team that was on the 92 or the 93 Blue Jays team that won the World Series. I got the rookie cards of every member of that team. And I got them from all the rookie card providers, all in mint. So I'm a big fan of the Blue Jays. In fact, I'm a big fan of baseball. I've got tobacco cards from 1910. There's Cy Young right there. That's a valuable card from 1910. You know, I've got lots of tobacco cards from the original. I'm a baseball fan. I've even got Ricky Henderson's game-used bat. Big fan of baseball. Now, that's a lot of clues that I like baseball. But does that mean that I was ever part of the Blue Jays team? Does that mean I was ever part of their staff, even the cleanup crew or anything? Nothing like that. I've got the first bat, the first giveaway from the first postseason game. That's a lot of ties between me and the Blue Jays. A lot of ties. But yet it doesn't make me part of their team. And I think the same thing applies to Paul. There's a lot of ties between Paul and Rome, but that doesn't mean that he's part of the Roman team. Doesn't mean he's not, but it's not proven. We don't have a case that can say that Paul's part of the Roman team. He's certainly a Roman who's very pro-Roman. It's a sin to disobey the emperor, pay your taxes, and the Jews were very, very up in arms about that issue. The Jews did not like the idea of paying taxes. In fact, Josephus mentions that this whole thing was part of Judah the Galilean's big shtick and how he got a big following as a tax revolt. So, and that whole movement seems to be more connected to Jesus. It was messianic in nature. When we read the Dead Sea Scrolls and the theology that it is very similar to Judah the Galilean's theology, we find out that it's a very, very nationalistic Jewish fervent messianic view. And I think that in view of the fact that Suetonius and Josephus and I'm missing one other one, different historians from Rome all noted that the Jewish revolt was based upon a messianic myth, the idea that there would be a leader from Judea to take over the whole world, that this was an essential part of the myth, that 3 different Roman historians noted it. Suetonius, Herodotus, and Josephus. They all noted that this was the modus operandi and the inspiration for hope for the Jewish rebels. It makes sense to me that the Romans would try to counteract that theology and try to pacify it. So if they had people who are already enthusiastic about Roman sex, Jewish sex, like Paul, who's a Herodian and working for Roman purposes already as part of that family, then I could see how he would be a logical person to hire to do a test run to see what we can do about pacifying, to see if we can't change that myth a little bit and Romanize the myth. So the Jewish messianic myth went from a 40-year expectation for the resurrection to a Romanized 3-day resurrection story. Now, that rewrite of the story only happened after the original Dead Sea Scroll community had been put down. That the first gospel came out in 70 CE. Well, by that time, there were no more Dead Sea Scroll sectarians. They'd all been wiped out. So except for Masada, and they got to them by 73 or 74, depending on the historian you read. So it seems to me like Paul is a candidate for being a Roman agent, but we don't have proof that he was. I think Paul was just a Roman enthusiast. It's like somebody who's an American citizen, always talking the American point of view when maybe he's over in some foreign country. Maybe he's in Canada, maybe he's in Europe, maybe he's wherever, and he's always presenting the American point of view. Well, you wouldn't say that he was an agent of the American government just because he was an enthusiastic American citizen. Well, we might say the same thing about Paul. Paul's an enthusiastic Roman citizen with Jewish background, so he has an interest in all that theology. And I think that we have a confirmation in the only way that we can double check these things, in my opinion, is to compare to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I think Robert Eisenman has made a great case to say that in Habakkuk Pesher, the liar, the man of the lie, is a perfect fit for the Apostle Paul. And that the teacher of righteousness in that Pesher is a perfect fit for the just. There's a series of these teachers. Jesus was a teacher of righteousness, and after him, James the Just took over. And after James the Just, another brother took over. And so you've got the whole Jesus dynasty thing, which is something that other scholars have noted, like James Tabor, for example. So I think that when we see the Dead Sea Scrolls saying that there was a very key conflict between some sort of person known as the man of the lie that they describe as someone who was in their congregation for a while, stayed for a short time, not long. He left under hostile circumstances. He preached about blood. He raised up congregations. That's really amazing. Raised up congregations. And he had a sacred meal that was poured. So they called him the pourer of lies. So that sounds to me like the Apostle Paul. How many people were running around with a competing Jewish sacred meal and raising up congregations? I don't think there's a long list of people doing that. So I think Paul is probably the single best candidate, as Eisenman has said, for being that the liar, the man of the lie, the Isha Hakazav, rather. I think that Paul's the best candidate there. And I think that he was a pro-Roman infiltrator of the Jesus movement. Whether he was an official agent, I don't think so. But I think that the official agencies in Rome had an interest in Paul, and that's why they saved him with a mass of soldiers when he got in trouble with the Jews. And I think that's also why he disappeared. He may have been called in on the red carpet by Nero and says, you really didn't pacify this movement like you were supposed to. And then Paul was never seen again. So I don't know. Anything else we say beyond that, I think, is speculation. Guys, your turn.
I'm going to start with you, Dr. Audlin. What do you think about all that? What's your thoughts?
Certain elements of what you just said, I tend to agree with. I see Paul as a personality, a very interesting personality. I show my psychology background in this, I suppose. He, as far as I'm concerned, since he grew up in the Tarsus area in Parthia, which was an empire rather larger than Rome and had an on-off hate-love relationship with Rome, he may well have been a part of a Roman family, and I do agree with Eisenman that it does look like he was part of the Herodian family. But it's very interesting to me as a linguist that his original name, Saolos, in Middle High Persian, means a deceiver, someone who lies, someone who is mendacious. And this appears to have been given to him as an epithet by his family, with whom he seems to have had a very difficult relationship. He seems to me, as I read about his life, to be someone who was constantly trying to prove himself, to put himself in the position of high regard that he felt he deserved. And that's probably a psychological thing to answer the nature of his relationship with his family. So he, as I say very often in the book, he has the ability to make words dance to the tune of his mendacity. He speaks of himself as a Hebrew, the descendant of Hebrews. And here I think he's very carefully using the word, how Hebrew in its original derivation means from the far side of the Euphrates, and that traditionally refers to when Abraham crossed the river, of course. But in the first century, that the Euphrates was the border between the Roman and the Parthian empires. So making these words dance like this, he could call himself a Hebrew, descended from Hebrews. And if someone drew from that the conclusion that he was claiming to be Jewish, that he was claiming to be Judean, he was fine with that, even if technically speaking it wasn't so. So I see him, as indeed Chris, you just suggested, as something of a schmoozer, something of a chameleon who is trying hard to put himself in a position of regard. So when he, and I do think he had the Roman citizenship, I agree there. And indeed, when he announces to the Judean disciples, apostles in Acts 18:6, that he's splitting from them, he says, and to translate the Greek literally, "Your blood be on your own head. From now on, I am going to the Gentiles." By which phrase, I don't think he meant to say your sins will be on your head, as it's often interpreted. Rather, I think what Paul is saying is the Jewish apostles, the ones who actually knew Jesus, which he did not, they can go after their own people. He's going to go after the larger world, the Gentile world, and seek them, because he's one of them. He is, in implication, he is affirming his own Gentile heritage at that point. So I see him not as an agent on behalf of the Roman Empire, so much as I do see him as a self-appointed agent of whatever he thinks will get him the respect, the adulation that he deserves. Thus, it is in his letters, oftentimes he puts himself in loco Christi, you could say. He puts himself up as the humblest and yet the greatest of the apostles. And yet he is the only one who did not know Jesus. So he makes that into that deficit into a profit by declaring, well, yes, the apostles knew him when Jesus was alive and in the flesh, but I know him today because he comes to me in visions. And of course, it's impossible for anybody other than the visionary himself to prove whether or not he's actually had the visions. So he can make that claim, and there's just no denying it. People either accept it or don't, but they can't prove that it's true or false. Neither can he. So I see his chameleon nature, his schmooze nature, as coming out in this manner. Up until the time when he split from the Jewish apostles, he was trying very hard to be Jewish. There are suggestions in the literature that he studied for a while with Gamaliel, and even the ever-patient Gamaliel finally couldn't put up with him and had to see him out the door. He may have done that. I don't know, but he may have done that at the behest of his family, because the family claimed to be part of this Jewish heritage going way back. However, other scholars, I could think of their name at the moment, other scholars, Matthew Novenson, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Steve Mason, they suggest that this word Judaismos that Paul uses doesn't necessarily so much mean a Judean as it means someone who comes of that heritage. And Eisenman himself suggested that this, and Daniel Boyarin suggests that this is actually a reference to the Samaritan people who, during the expulsion from the Holy Land, wound up in what became later on Parthia. So Paul, even though he's trying hard to be a Judean, if he has what little blood he may have is apparently more likely Samaritan. So the whole thing is like a house of cards, you could say, that Paul is putting up to aggrandize himself. And his style of evangelism was to schmooze with the powerful and the wealthy, and that oftentimes brought him close to nobility, royalty, and he definitely schmoozed them up. But I wouldn't go so far as to say he was in any way an agent on their behalf. I would say he was his own agent trying hard to gain their attention, their approbation, because he felt that would be the key to gaining the attention and approbation of the entire world.
I'd like to comment on what you just said. A couple of short comments. First of all, Paul never used the term Jew to apply to himself. He called himself an Israelite or a Hebrew, but he never used the term Jew. So it seems like this Paul did not identify as Jewish that way. This is the commonality he had with Josephus. Josephus didn't identify as a Jew. When Josephus mentioned Jewish writings and Jewish laws, he said their laws and their writings. Theirs, not ours, but theirs. So he didn't include himself in that category. And you can tell it from his pronoun use. The other thing is, you mentioned the meaning of the name Saulus, and I also take note that it could be he was called Saul, being named after King Saul. It is mentioned that Paul was a Benjaminite. He was proud to be a Benjaminite rather than being in the tribe of Judah. And King Saul was the first king of Israel, and he was a Benjaminite. And it was the Davidic kingdom, the Davidic throne, that took away the crown of royalty from the Benjaminites. It didn't go to King Saul's son, so it went over to David instead of to King Saul's son Jonathan. It could well be that the Benjaminites held a grudge over that, and the idea of should the royal line of Israel belong to the tribe of David or the tribe of Benjamin? Well, the tribe of David sealed it up and locked it in tight for them forever when they got the whole messianic myth going that the Messiah, if you want the messianic king, he will be a son of David. And therefore, if you want the messianic king, you better make sure every king is a son of David. So they locked up the royal titles with the myth. So it only makes sense that anybody who was named after the king, the very first one who lost that throne, may have been holding the grudge generationally and saying, if we undo the myth, we're taking the crown of Israel away from Jesus, and we're taking the Messiah is no longer a king, but he's a savior God instead in the new myth. The messianic king idea stirred up revolt and stirred up the Jews to have their own kingdom. Instead, the new kingdom is spiritual. It's in heaven, and it's pie in the sky kingdom. So that's a demilitarizing and a pacifying of the Jewish myth. So the idea that Paul's own theology and Paul's own objectives fit that name and the objectives tied to that name historically is another suggestive but non-conclusive factor in our equations. Anyway.
Yeah, just a wee response really quick with apologies to Doug. Just a wee response. By the late Second Temple period, by the late Second Temple period, the tribe of Benjamin really didn't exist anymore. It had been wholly absorbed into the tribe of Judaea, and in which the Herodians and their allies, the temple hierarchy, including without doubt Annas, Caiaphas, and the gang, were claiming their relationship. The Romanian polymath István Orbit, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, determined that Herod and his relative Paul were both primarily of Parthian Scythian ancestry. So their claim to be Herodians is apparently founded on this. It's a very tenuous claim. So I don't see it so much as being part of the tribe of Benjamin, which at this point was out of the equation, but more just this claim going back into Parthia that their Scythian ancestry, their Parthian Scythian ancestry was, excuse me, related distantly to the tribe of Benjamin.
That's interesting. There's also a Jewish tradition that the Spartans were brothers of the Jews. They were related. So
that's true. Yeah.
All right, before Doug speaks, I think it's important that we I think that I think what's been said so far has already shown it, but let's just make it clear. Roman provenance is not what's being advocated in this stream. This the conspiracy theory that Rome fabricated Christianity, that's a totally different ball game. That's not being discussed here. Paul, one way or another, regardless of whatever agreements and disagreements that these guests have on the stream, I think we can all agree that Paul was an outsider in one sense or another, and he joined the Jesus movement, whatever they were called in Paul's day. And what does Paul say in his genuine letters? That there were those in Christ before me. So obviously he didn't start it. And yeah, so the Roman provenance is not being discussed here. We're not discussing that ridiculous theory.
Right.
I've always suggested that Paul has revised the myth that the Jews started the mythology on Jesus first. That the whole messianic myth started with the Jews. Now, I see Jesus as being just one of the series of teachers of righteousness of a Dead Sea Scroll type nature. And again, a Jewish nationalist and planning for a real kingdom with a real war in the real time. And we get a slight clue of that in the New Testament. There's one part of the New Testament that has corroboration outside of the Bible saying of Jesus, and that's the Lord's Prayer. And we have a sample of that being quoted in the Gospel of Thomas. He wouldn't have said our Father unless he had a human father. That reference is a reference to the Lord's Prayer. So that means the Lord's Prayer may be a genuine example of the historical Jesus' sayings. And when you take that into account, it says, thy kingdom come, thy will be done where? On earth. That's where the kingdom comes, on earth. It's not a heavenly pie in the sky kingdom like Paul says. The historical Jesus' kingdom was a kingdom on earth. So I can see that Paul was revising a myth that already existed. Paul was attempting to pacify a myth that was militarized. And where do we find a militarized messianic myth from the first century? The Dead Sea Scrolls. And that's the messianic movement, as I see it. And Paul was trying to change the story. But he didn't start the story. Roman Provenance says the Romans started the story. Nonsense. My idea and the evidence suggests Paul came after the story was already well underway and causing a concern to the Romans. So the Romans wanted to influence the story, but they didn't invent the story.
All right, Doug. Can you since this is the first time on your channel, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your YouTube channel?
Well, thank you, Jacob. By the way, I hear everything in double audio, so I'm having a little bit of trouble. So I delay in responding. You'll know why.
Oh, okay.
All right. So I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for 42 years. I just recently retired. And okay, now I'm hearing myself say I was speaking in double audio. So it's a delay double audio.
So let me. Echo cancellation is turned on for all the guests, so I don't know what's going on.
Well, I looked in my settings and I couldn't solve it. Anyway, I'll try to ignore it. Actually, I'm going to take my headset off or I'll just hear myself twice. Okay. Anyway, so I've been an attorney for 42 years, and I am a Christian. I have been a Christian since I was 14 years old. And so I've dedicated my life, my church life and my family life to serve Christ. And when I was in Costa Rica, I realized these people don't have the same faith in Costa Rica. I was living there in 1999 and 2004, that basically didn't accept the Pauline gospel. So that made me start questioning Paul. I did my investigation, and I've used my skills in Greek and Latin. I've received scholarship and prep for that. So basically, it's been about 20 years self-study. I have a channel called JesusWordsOnly.com. I also have a website called JesusWordsOnly.org, and that's been around for 5 years or so. Anyway, so if I can give my opinion, I do think Paul is a Roman agent. I think that's very clear. And whether he was an Herodian or not actually could be a secondary issue, could be bolstering the claim. But what makes him a Roman agent is his own admission at the beginning, where he says he was serving the high priest, who is a Herodian appointee in the first place. So if we know that, he has to be working for an official. The high priest is no longer a real Jewish character. He is serving the Herodian party. He is appointed by the Herodian party. That had been going on for decades. So he's serving that party, and then what's very key is he has the power to kill. The Romans had prevented the Sanhedrin itself to ever give a death penalty. See, lawyers, we look at these little details, but they make a big difference.
Good point.
If the Sanhedrin can't kill anyone, where is Paul getting his authority to kill anyone? He's getting it not from Rome. He's not getting it from even the high priest. The high priest doesn't have authority to do that. Only the Romans can kill anybody in punishment. That's your proof that he was already a complete 100% in the pot for the Roman government. He was serving Rome. The high priest could say, here's where the Christians are, and give him missions that would serve their interests too. But his authority to kill people is why you know he's a Roman agent from the very beginning. You don't process that fact, you're not going to get it. So now he's a Roman agent. Now what happens? He says he has an experience on the road to Damascus. He says this was outside the city of Damascus, which is a wilderness. And Christ even said, if anyone says they met me on a wilderness road and or in a private room, Paul also says later, Jesus came down personally into a cell, in a closed cell, and gave him encouragement. He fits the warning of Christ that you can't have somebody who says, I met him in a wilderness or I met him on a private road, unless that was universally seen from every point east and west. So as a Christian, I'm suspicious of the story. I'm mandated by my Lord to ignore him. But now let's look at the issue. Is he a Roman agent after he joins Christianity? Let's look at how he behaves. So let's also look at what he says. Let's see if what he teaches Christians was designed to promote Rome. 1 Thessalonians, the Jews are the enemies of all mankind. Is that anything like what a Jewish person would say? Is that anyone who was really Jewish and had an allegiance to Jewish people ever say in their right mind? No. Adolf Hitler used this quote, which Luther himself made famous in his book on the Jews and their lies, I think is the title of his horrific book. Okay? Anti-Semitism, attacking Jews, undermining their validity as a people is a Roman interest, not a Christian interest, and clearly not the Christian church that we see in Acts 21 telling Paul, hey, these myriads of Jews are zealous for the law and they've come to follow Jesus. These people are Jews. They're 12 apostles that are all Jews. Paul is saying the Jews are the enemy of all mankind. It's one of the most horrific statements of history. It's killed 8 million Jews now, and in the early church, it was designed to disrupt and divide the church. The Romans had a clear strategy called Divide et Impera, from Julius Caesar's work on the wars that he fought, and that was his strategy. He wouldn't. How often would he undermine before he even got there? He explains, we send in agent provocateurs, we send in spies. Look at the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. I've studied that in great detail. These are things that you've got to do if you want to be a serious scholar of Roman history. Roman history is, take a look at the Jerusalem. That was planned months beforehand. Do you not realize Roman agents could come and go? Nobody would notice it's Roman agents coming and going in and out of the temple. They could knock down, whatever. People there could be fooled by what they call the zealots. There's a party in there that people were told, oh, these are the zealots. These zealots, in the middle of that conflict, the two things. They shouldn't. There's a million people inside the They're going to be able to get out when the Romans come in walls. So people know how to get out, and they've got secret passes so they can get out. That's the whole plan. They go in and they burn all there was grain that could last, they said, 25 years. So the siege could have gone on for years. But this group destroyed the grain. So they couldn't stay. So this was the insanity that is later the historians said, well, that was just the zealots. They were so overzealous, they didn't want people to think they would just wait it out. They wanted to fight the Romans now. That's what you're told. It's preposterous. Nobody would burn all their food. Right? You would never destroy the very thing that sustains you. But that would be a Roman thing to do. But it gave them cover. This is how Rome worked. You divide and conquer. So the way that siege all happened was key. It was all planned to end in a fire, destroying the grain. Exactly as was planned. Romans do nothing by accident. I remember this famous movie about the Russians. The Russians don't even go to the bathroom without a plan. The Romans don't go into any war without a plan. And they plan it years ahead of time. So that is telling you the same kind of attitude would be with Paul. He was a Roman agent, clearly, before he became a Christian. Did his alleged Christian experience fit anything that we should accept? He's changed. He's no longer a Roman. The answer is absolutely not, because of things like the Jews, the enemies of all mankind. But let me give you another one. This is amazing. He admits it himself. 1 Corinthians 9, I'm a Jew to a Jew. I'm a Gentile. I'm a Jew to a Jew, and I'll pretend. Actually, the word can be translated in Greek. I pretend. I became like. I pretend to. Yes, James knows what I'm saying. I loved your. Actually, Mr. Lawson, you said the same thing. He can pretend to be something he isn't. That's exactly what a Roman spy would say, and he defends it as ethical. Not only ethical, but it's promoting the cause of Christ. Which Christ? And I'm famous for my digressions on my channel, so I'm going to just digress for a minute. If you read 1 Colossians 1:15-17, you're going to see a pagan religion right there, because you have God the Father. He says has his prototokos, his firstborn of creation is Jesus, and Jesus creates everything. And it's in the Nicene Creed, just exactly the way it reads. Jesus created all things, and nothing was created that Jesus did not create. What religion is that? Is that Judaism? No. God, Yahweh, says, I alone gave the law. I alone created heavens and earth. Excuse me. Paul is saying the Father only created one being, Jesus. And then Jesus created everything else. And you know what religion that is? That's the religion of Zeus and Apollo at the city of Delphi, as explained. People say to me, Doug, you don't know Greek religion. Oh, yes, I do. You don't. Because you got to go read the book called On the Letter E, Plutarch. Plutarch was the priest who interpreted the messages of the Delphic Oracle. Now, the Delphic Oracle was a woman who would use Thessalia. Nobody can understand what she's saying. So you could not know what she was telling you in a prophecy you would be paying for. So this priest had to interpret every single client who would come in and say, I want a prophecy from the Delphic Oracle. That priest was named Plutarch. He wrote a book called On the Letter E, and he explained this religion in a very distinct way. He told us that Zeus had a son, Apollo, who was the creator of heaven and earth. Sound any familiarity yet? Creator of heaven and earth, and he's also the destroyer in the future, but that's another issue. So Apollo is the sun, and the Apollo creates all mankind. So Apollo the sun, god of the sun, is also known as god of the sun, and in Rome, Sol Invictus. That's the religion of pagans, and that's what's in the Nicene Creed. That's what Christians bow down to, this Zeus Apollo god that Paul injected into our system in Colossians 1:15-17. And so Christians have been living inside of a Roman Catholic construct from the 325 on period that was created by the Romans to, in this instance, syncretize by taking Paul's Zeus Apollo religion. It was clearly obvious to anybody who knew Roman religion and believed in Zeus Apollo, because you got to also know the Delphic Oracle was very influential in in Roman religion too. Everybody from the whole empire would come and see her to get the oracles. And it's twice a year in the season of her prophecies. So this is who Paul is. He's definitely able to pretend what he isn't. And he can pretend to be a Christian too. If he can fool the Jew, if he can fool the Gentile, don't you think, stupid Gentile, that he can fool you? Yes, he can, and he would, and he does, and he has for millions of of you is that he's shameless about it too. And then in Romans 3:7, he says, if by my lie, I give glory to God, warn him, I still judge a sinner. And some people try to make up new words and add that to soften it, but it doesn't, because there's an antithesis between that and what he does say is wrong. He still says it's wrong to do evil and good may come. The antithesis or contrast is with the statement that he does believe is true, which is, if by my lie the gospel is advanced, why am I called a sinner? So he's definitely saying there, I am not sinning when I lie for the gospel. It's all justified. So his gospel is not our gospel of Christians. He's the gospel of Zeus and Apollo. Oh, and let me tell you one more thing that was explained in the book on the letter E by Plutarch in 200 AD. He said that Apollo, in our little religion here on Delphi, we call him Dionysius. Now, that should ring a bell to any scholar. Who was the words that was quoted in the Acts 9 and Acts 26, where explains that I think it was Antipas in Acts 26. Jesus, when this light came down, and I said, "Who are you?" I don't know who he was, by the way. He says, "Who are you, sir?" And translated, "Lord," it's here means "sir." Who are you, sir? And Jesus says, "I'm Jesus whom you persecute." And so he was basically unaware of who he was. He was unaware who Jesus was, but he lost my train of thought. But okay, I'm going to discuss that. But one more thing I want to say is the Romans 13 passage is the way you know he's a Roman agent inside of Christianity, trying to infect us with a belief that we have to obey the Romans. If I read it to you, you go, "This is unbelievable." He says, "God, the ruling or governing authorities are God's agents." In that era, it's Rome. It's totally Rome. And he doesn't say it once, and you could say it's misunderstood. He repeats it. That's wonderful. He repeats it not just twice, but 4 times in the passage. How much you must obey everything they tell you to do, and they speak for God. And then he says, you don't do it just to avoid offense. You do it because it's morally required, and if you don't do it, you're going to be condemned. Or the word he uses, krima. He's definitely saying you're going to be judged and go to hell by disobeying these Roman authorities. So is Paul a Roman agent in dividing and conquering the Christian church? Well, the answer isn't putting. Christians today are divided off onto a Roman religion, and they don't know it. The Nicene Creed really just is possible to 17 with a little bit of added flavor. You know, Jesus is God, which even Paul did not say in Colossians 1:57. He just simply said he was the creator of the heavens and earth, and nothing was created that he did not create. So that's not the same as calling him as God, which is interesting, because when you get to the Trinitarian dispute, actually the Trinitarians or the anti-Trinitarians were using Colossians 1:15 to prove that Jesus could not be God. Because why? Because he's the prototokos of creation. He was the firstborn. He wasn't the creator himself. He wasn't eternal. He was the prototokos. He was the firstborn, just like Apollo was the firstborn of Zeus. Okay, just to get back to my other point. So this is beyond doubt, in my view. If you know Roman law and you know Roman history, you would know Paul is a Roman agent through and through, and never changed. Unfortunately, Christians, we have been duped by a very good con artist who is self-confessed. He admits he's a chameleon. He doesn't even hide it. So that's what my channel's about, partly because we try to bring Christians away from the Trinity doctrine as well. That was definitely created out of this false construct, and also all the anti-Semitism that goes along with a lot of Christian theology that is infecting us today. That people, it's okay, you know, the apostles don't matter. They're, as Paul said, this is what I was trying to get to. But, you know, Paul dismissed the Jews, right? He even dismissed the 12 apostles. You know, they're false apostles. They're super apostles. Even Luther said that's what he's referring to, the 12. And he's putting them down to make himself look better. And I've suffered more than any of them. And he goes through a whole litany of all the sufferings he suffered. Very, very humble person, by the way. And he can't wait to just tell you how humble he really is. And even says, you know, I exceed them in all my humility. I mean, he's an endless source of self-aggrandizement. That's all I can say, which, again, is what a Roman insecure agent's going to do. There is an insecurity in him. Definitely. He's got a weakness, which he knows he can't stop. boasting. He even says, I know I shouldn't boast, but I can't stop boasting. So he's got some other flaws that are not good for a Christian to even be exposed to. But again, getting back to his anti-Semitism, and that's still in Christianity. These words are in the Bible. Christians are so told. Those words are from God, that the Jews are the enemies of all mankind. What consequences that has had. So I've always told Christians, there's one verse, if I could redo the Bible, I would literally black it out and say, you're never going to see that verse again. And if you want to see it, you got to go look it up, because that is killed millions of people. It was on posters of Luther. The quote of Luther was put on posters by Hitler all throughout the Reich, showing this is why we're taking care of the Jews. And the people didn't know they were being killed. They just thought they were being rounded up and their positions taken away and all their money removed, and their jobs taken from them, and they have to live in poverty. They didn't know. I honestly believe they did not know. I've met German people, and they tell me we had no idea they were being massacred, burned, and killed. But it doesn't matter. These words of Paul had consequences, and anybody who thinks you just leave him in the Bible and it will never happen again are being irresponsible. Not saying, hey, we need to take action. We need to remove at least that line, if not his entire corpus of work, because it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to a different God, Zeus, Apollo. Oh, this is the other thing I want to remember. The words that came out of Paul's Jesus on the road to Damascus is a direct quote from the play Bacchae, which is words of Dionysius. And when Paul quotes it, it's from the play. It's not just the words, cannot kick against the pricks, in regular Greek. It's in the meter, what's called meter. In plays in that era, it was called meter. So if you wanted to rhyme it, you have to use meter. This is a direct quote, therefore, out of the play Bacchae, and I think it's Euripides wrote it. So why is that important? Because Christians can't see what a pagan will see by reading Paul. Paul is promoting Zeus Apollo religion, and that Apollo is who he's telling the secret message that us dumb Gentiles, we don't see the secret message. We're not Greek pagans, but the Greek pagans go, oh, his Jesus is Apollo because he's quoting from the play. Cannot kick against the words of Apollo to the king, the ruler of, I think, a town in Greece somewhere. So that is where Paul is sending a secret message, not that you and I can see. He's a chameleon. He can hide it from us because we're dumb, but he knows what he's doing, and he's telling his secret agent pals, we're injecting. The mission of mine is to bring into Christianity a false religion, a false theology, bring a different Christ, make it think it's Jesus, portray him in a glorious way, make him even grander than he really was, meaning he's God Almighty, he's the creator of heavens and earth, and the Father is the only role he has is to make Jesus the prototokos. That is the theology of Paul that no Christian should ever have been fooled by, but we are, because we don't know pagan religion. It doesn't. We read it, we just go, well, we've heard that before. That's the Nicene Creed, but we don't ask where did they get it. So anyway, that's it. Paul is definitely a Roman agent. He definitely was promoting syncretism through the Apollo religion, and he was also promoting Herodian interest or Roman interest by telling you have to obey everything these Roman officials, basically Herodians, are saying, as if it was not only as if it was from God, as because it is from God. All right, so that's my opening statement.
Can I apologize for disappearing twice? One of the problems with living in a very rural part of the country of Panama is that electricity now and then goes out for no apparent reason. There are no redundant circuitry in Panama. It's a poor country. It's a third world country. So I apologize. Sometimes I lose power.
Oh, no problem.
From the dip. Could I just throw one little point? I wanted to throw it in a long time ago, but obviously I couldn't. Just a really tiny point, and that is as regards the schmoozing and the connections that Paul had to the big people. Of course, we know from Acts, it's at chapter 12, I think, where he has the confrontation with Sergius Paulus, and it is after that confrontation that he takes the name Paul as opposed to Saul. Well, Sergius Paulus was a close friend of none less than Pliny the Elder, the author of the Natural History. Pliny refers to him as an intelligent man. They quotes him often on the subject of botany and biology. And Pliny was a close, lifelong friend of Emperor Vespasian, he whose name was given to the Vespasian that some of us recall in Paris. And Vespasian, of course, was the one who originally looked to conquer Jerusalem. And it was his son, Emperor Titus, who completed the job. And Emperor Titus calls him his old tent mate, his contubernium. And that suggests, the Latin suggests that they slept in the same tent while on military campaigns. So this connection, this is just like everybody in the world is separated from you by, I forget how it goes, no less than 4 intervening people. Well, something like that. Paul was schmoozing with some rather important people, including emperors. So while in no way was he their agent, he was his own agent, and by schmoozing in one direction to the powerful, he hoped to gain the multitude. And of course, he succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Christianity, as we know it today, is by far the most successful of the ancient Roman mystery religions. Paul came from a town, Tarsus, where these mystery religions, several of them got their start, Mithraism, for example, Apollinianism, and others. And so it is the most successful of the mystery religions, and it succeeded because he got the high and mighty on his side.
I want to ask the 3 of you, y'all's thoughts on 2 Corinthians 11, verse 32. Because this is something that bothered me back then, and it has started bothering me again recently. In Damascus, the governor under Aretas, the king kept the city of the Damascenes with a garrison, desirous to apprehend me. Now, I can never find an explanation. There really isn't an explanation. Scholars speculate overwhelmingly about what this means. But I'm like, well, I think if you take Romans 16, 10 to 11 literally, when he says, greetings to the household Aristobulus, even followed by greetings my kinsman Herodiana, then I think that's why he had to flee from Aretas. Because if you read Josephus, all the 3 of us know that King Aretas waged war against the Tetrarch Herod Antipas in 37 CE or 80. And that would have been when Paul fled from King Aretas in the standard chronology. And King Aretas, if Paul was a relative of the Herods, which I've come back to thinking that recently, once again, because I used to think that for years, and back to that again, then that's why he fled from Aretas. That's Aretas' motivation to go after Paul. He's a relative of the Herods. He found out about that. Because the Jesus movement they didn't have a large following in Aretas, near Aretas's empire, his kingdom. That doesn't make sense. Why? What reason is there for Aretas to go after Paul? Paul never explains. He just mentions briefly, off the cuff, that's what was going on. Why did Paul flee from Aretas? Well, if he's a Herodian, as you all point out, as I've pointed out before, as Robert Eisenman has pointed out, Taylor Marshall has pointed out, then that explains this verse right here. We don't have to speculate the reasons arbitrarily as to why he fled from Aretas. No, Romans 16, what he says there about who he's related to, I think is the obvious reason why he had to flee from Aretas.
Plus,
what do y'all think about that?
Large dose of Paul's penchant for exaggeration in order to aggrandize himself.
Exactly. Exaggeration indeed. Paul says that he'd been shipwrecked twice, he'd been beaten, and all these. He's got this long list, and
three times too. He says,
yeah, he's got a big exaggeration going on this list, I think. So he's making himself look like he's the not only the best apostle, he's the best martyr. He's just happened to survive all of his things. Yeah, so
he's the most humble.
Yeah,
he's the best at being worst.
Are all these episodes? I don't know. For example, I see a conflict in the whole Damascus story. It says that he's got a warrant from the high priest to go after the followers of Jesus who are residents in Damascus. Well, there are 3 places in the ancient world that were named Damascus, and I think Paul has rewritten history by making it Damascus up in the Antioch area later on. I think that's a rewrite of the history. I think the real history would have been the only Damascus that he could have had a warrant from the high priest with. A warrant from the high priest means it's a Damascus in Judea, because a warrant from the high priest can't go beyond Judea. And there's only one place in Judea known as Damascus, and that was Qumran. They called themselves Damascus. We know that from the Damascus document. And that was a residence of disciples. That makes sense, because Qumran was the residence of the Messianic movement in the 1st century. So I see a tie
Could
there,
I make a comment?
and I see the whole idea being let down out of a window story in the other Damascus as being a complete fraudulent story, and maybe even a little right on some Homeric myth type of thing being worked into the story. I see it as Paul's making it up along the way, an exaggeration. I don't know. I don't think it's historical.
Doug, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, again, I'm hearing double. So is no one talking? I can hear someone talking, but maybe he's not really talking. Okay, so you had Mr. Charlesworth on recently, and he explained that the word Damascus does not necessarily mean the city of Damascus. Like, I do believe Paul meant he was outside a city of Damascus in that story of Acts 9, but otherwise, the word Damascus, according to Charlesworth, meant the entire region from Judea to Antioch. So it's not specifically Antioch. And that is a mistake people make. Even the Damascus document that was found in the 1890s, really, we now realize, Charlesworth pointed out, as a Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, where that was found again, that really is the region of that area, all the way from the Judean region all the way to Antioch and Syria. So I just want to make that clear. That can cause confusion. I did enjoy your article, Mr. Lawson. I noticed that in your article. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And again, Mr. Jacob has had Mr. Charlesworth on where he explains this at length.
Chris, did you want to say something?
No, I just maybe make a totally separate observation. That's the nature of mythology and stuff. People don't realize that we have our own myths today. Most of them are in comic books, things like that. So if you were to tell any kind of story to an average American audience and talk about Superman, everybody's going to know the myth of Superman. But yet this is the myth that Jor-El has sent his son off to Earth as a gift to planet Earth because their potential for good is why Jor-El has sent them Kal-El, his only son. It's a whole mythology of a savior god who has come to Earth living among men. So we do have our own modern equivalents of mythology. And I think Paul was trying to create his own myth in Christianity, and he certainly did. Modern Christianity is basically Paulianity, is what they really should call it. It's basically based on everything Paul's written. And the very first Gospels were obviously fans of Paul. You look at Mark, and it's got the same attitude towards the Jews. The Jews are stupid and dull-witted. Everything the Romans do are right. Jesus talks to the Jews for 3 years, and they can't figure out who he is. But a Roman centurion sees Jesus at his worst and recognizes right away, surely he must be the Son of God. The Jewish people want to kill Jesus, and Pilate, the Roman, says, "Oh, this is an innocent man." The Romans are bright and observant, and they can figure things out, but the Jews are stupid and dull-witted. It seems like the first gospel has adapted completely a Pauline attitude towards the Jews and Pauline theology that you're saved by your faith. There's no evidence of you have to be Torah observant. in any of the Gospels. That's all. They all assume the Pauline theology. So I think the first Gospel, Mark, was basically written by a Pauline fan.
Even so even if Paul was lying when he said that he fled from King Aretas, would y'all at least say it's evidence that of the Herodian connection? Because why would you even claim that you fled from Aretas unless you're trying to integrate yourself, juxtapose yourself in the Herodian Aretas war situation? What do y'all think about that?
It makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, Doug,
he sees all opportunities and aggrandize them and use them as effectively as he could in order to raise himself in status, or his self-perceived status. I mean,
yeah,
self-perceived status. I mean,
and you might notice in the Book of Acts, if you go through the Book of Acts and have a sheet of paper beside you while you do it, and write a line right down the middle of the paper, and on one side, one column, you put Paul's friends, and over on the other column, you put Paul's enemies. And you go through each time, someone wants to kill Paul. Who is it? It's a Jew. Someone saves Paul when he's in danger. Who is it? It's a Gentile. And every single time you go through the list, it's all of Paul's enemies were Jews, and all of Paul's friends were Gentiles. So then you...
So the Jews are the enemies of Paul, but not all mankind.
Yeah. And the Herodians were installed as rulers over Judea by the Romans. So you have the Benjaminite clan ruling Judea, put in place by the Romans, and the Jews didn't like it. Paul was anti-Jewish, pro-Herodian, pro-Roman. So which side was Paul on? Here's a Benjaminite installed by the Romans, and Paul's a Benjaminite working for the Romans. So which side was he on?
Yeah, and he wants his followers to be the same thing. Short hair for the men. Women, shut your mouths. Obey the authorities.
Yeah.
Can I give you one more interesting thing? He tells the men in 1 Corinthians 7, he says, well, the time is short, so now you should live with your wife as if you have none. What does that mean? Stop procreating. Be like the Essenes. They last one generation following that celibacy rule. He wanted to do away with Christians by not getting them to procreate. That's another Roman proof that he's a Roman agent.
Absolutely. And isn't that ironic that the Roman Catholic Church, which is basically the construct created by Paul, given time, the seed grown to fruition, has mostly propagated by encouraging lots of children and saying no abortion and every pregnancy come to term and yada yada yada. Yep. So the exact opposite has come out of it.
Well, they don't. I don't know if you know this, but that the Roman, one of the major differences, while Rome adopted Paul's theology of Christ in Colossians, what I read earlier, chapter 1, verse 15 to 17, they did not accept a lot of his other teachings. Okay, so for example, Augustine explained in 405 AD in his book called Faith and Works that we don't accept this idea that faith alone saves you. So they rejected that, and he said that 2 Peter, we don't pay attention, but 2 Peter, Jude, James, and there was another one. They were all directed, he says, all directed to do away with Paul's doctrine of faith alone.
There are lines in Matthew that suggest the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Sure, makes sense.
So, and really, what it appears to be is the only reason Paul had any tenuous basis of being in the Bible was that sole passage in Colossians I read you. That's how he got his fame, because he would be included in the Nicene Creed forever. Mm-hmm. But other than that, he has no Christian theology, to Catholic theology. He does not give the message of salvation. Unfortunately, Catholicism went even crazier than that later at the Council of Trent. You're now saved by baptism. You're justified by baptism. They don't even follow what they taught. No, when Augustine taught, it was good works. No, now it's baptism that saves you.
Yeah, the Catholics ran their own direction with the ball. Once they were given the ball, they went their own way. So, okay, we're going to rewrite the rules here.
Another New Testament.
It's okay to rewrite, they say.
Another New Testament source that, in my view, is clearly directed at Paul is several of the 7 letters in chapters 2 and 3 of the Revelation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've got an article on academia.edu if anybody is interested in that. But
I would love to see that.
As I parse the Aramaic, because I go back to the Aramaic, he is definitely talking about Paul.
On the Aramaic thing, I think a lot of people don't realize this, but words in the book of Revelation are basically Aramaic terms. If you know Greek,
Absolutely.
you know this is not Greek. He made up his own version of Greek.
Even the syntax, even the syntax in the Greek, it's crazy syntax in Greek.
It's crazy if you try to figure it out.
But if you read the Greek, thinking to yourself, this is Aramaic, it suddenly starts making sense. Right. So I recommend, if the two of you are interested, look at the Crawford Codex. That's the only early text we have of the Revelation that is not very obviously back translated from Greek. It represents, as far as I can tell, the original text that was then later translated into Greek.
The Crawford Codex.
Can I give you a little?
No pun intended, but it's a revelation.
So let me give you a little.
When I finally get the Gospel of John out of the way, I'm going to get back to my Revelation book, because that's going to knock a few eyeballs out of heads.
Can I then comment on that? So yeah. I agree with you about Revelation 2. Christians don't really read that often because it talks about people who say they're apostles but are not, but are false and are liars. That comes out of the mouth of Jesus. Then he condemns in 2 places. He condemns those churches that allow eating meat sacrificed to idols. Paul clearly allows eating meat sacrificed to idols in 1 Corinthians 8 and 10. You know, hey, why is my conscience bound by another guy's conscience? So I'll eat it when I want to, but in front of him, I might, so he doesn't get offended. I won't eat in front of somebody who thinks it's wrong. But why is his conscience binding me? So he clearly was saying it's okay. You can eat meat sacrificed to idols, which is a death penalty according to. If you read Balaam, when he promoted that idea, Moses had him executed. This is not even it's not a little thing to eat meat sacrificed to idols.
Look, that passage in Revelation really clearly ties the Apostle Paul to Nero, because the enemies of the Christians, the followers of Jesus, let's not call them Christians, that makes it sound Pauline. The enemies of the Jewish Messianic movement in Revelation, they're clearly speaking about Nero. The whole mark of the beast thing, the number of the beast fits Nero's name. There are 2 versions of the numbers in the various texts. There's 616 and 666, and they both fit the name of Nero, depending on whether you have it in the accusative tense or the nominative case. So Nero Caesar is 616, and Neron Caesar in the accusative case is 666 in the when you do the gematria, putting it into Hebrew letters and doing the numbers.
Except in the Aramaic, it's an acronym. It's not a number at all, but an acronym.
Oh, okay. And so the idea that it fits Nero's name, though, so perfectly with that, and it says the number of the name, and the name is the name of a man, very clear. They couldn't specify it better than that. The souls under the altar, whose blood's crying out for vengeance, clearly seems to be a reference to those Christians persecuted by Nero. And so the idea that the so-called apostles, etc., is a reference to Paul as also that same enemy of the group. It says that Paul's an enemy along with Nero in the same, they're linked together in the same category, the enemies of the Messianic movement. So that they're all linked that way. I never thought of Revelation as a tie of Paul to Nero, but it is when you look at that.
Like the old hymn, Nero, my God, to thee.
But can I just fill in on, because I'm so fascinated that you have an Aramaic source of the book of Revelation. That'd be really interesting because obviously John, this is the myth that the Christian Bible was originally written in Greek. Just let me, no way. These are peasants out of Galilee. They couldn't write in Greek.
Yes. Some of it was written originally in Greek. Yes,
well, Paul,
not by any means all.
Matthew may have been
Paul only knew
in
Greek.
Aramaic.
Basically, the Pauline texts were written in Greek. Basically, the apostolic texts were written in Aramaic. It's that simple.
That's exactly right. Aramaic could be like a form of Hebrew, by the way. So it's like
Galilean Aramaic is my specialty. You know, I read Greek, I read Latin, I read all the languages, but Galilean Aramaic, especially, everybody studies Syriac. But Syriac didn't even take off for about 3 centuries after the Second Temple period. So it's kind of like talking. I'm an expert in modern English, therefore I can read Beowulf. It's simple.
Okay,
Right.
you've got a lot of information.
I read Galilean Aramaic, for which there are no dictionaries, no lexicons, no grammars in existence. Period. I had to do it the hard way. That's why this book has taken 50 years, because I had to do it the hard way. But that's what I work with. And in the Aramaic, it's a completely different smoke. When I read, that's what got me started with the Gospel of John, and it's now going to be coming out. I just finished the text editing last night. Soon it'll be in the hands of the publishers. 12 volumes, 6,000 pages, and it took that many pages because I had to gently tear down so many structures in the academic community in order to build something fresh and new and explain carefully with every brick I'm putting in this edifice why I'm doing it.
Okay,
it's not easy work.
Let me see if this helps you, because you know who Papias was. He was the bishop of Hierapolis. He was a friend of John.
Papias of Hierapolis. He's the one who translated it first into Greek. His grasp of Aramaic was weak, but he was the one who got the job, because John, though still alive, had suffered from a stroke and was not able to finish the text after it came back at the hands of Marcion.
Wow. So all I know is that the Bible of Toledo from the 7th century, 700s, said that Papias was the amanuensis to John, and that's how it came into Greek. But you're saying that actually you have more sources that prove that. Than
there's plenty.
So that's
are you going to write a lexicon? Are you going to write a lexicon for Galilean Aramaic for us and write a grammar for us?
I've been asked thousands of times, but I think I've provided enough clues, like crumbs, you could say.
No, you haven't done enough.
Somebody else can do it.
You're not done yet. You're not done.
I'm a left hemisphere kind of guy. I don't have the logical kind of brain to write grammars and dictionaries. Somebody will. But in 6,000 pages, obviously, I give a lot of hints on how Galilean Aramaic was constructed and the very different vocabulary.
So do you think with you reading your version of John, we're going to get a better picture?
Yes.
Now, I want to tell you.
How do you know Galilean Aramaic? How did you figure this out?
Basically, I mean, I am a linguist. I have whole bunches of languages under my belt, and I learn languages not in a classroom. I cannot do it in a classroom. I'm too stupid. I do it the same way a baby does. I listen, I memorize, I repeat, I do my best to learn it. Which hemisphere? The left? No, the right hemisphere. I try to learn it in the intuitive way, but I've picked up enough Galilean Aramaic that at this point I'm reading it like the daily newspaper. But Syriac looks strange to me when I read it. I can understand it, but it's very different, and I don't think people realize how different it was. In addition, there's the Masoretic pointing issue, as it's called in Hebrew. There was similar pointing introduced in Aramaic, and Syriac texts have that pointing. The effect of pointing is it limits the words to one meaning and one meaning only, where without the pointing, it can have a multiplicity of meaning. And John, for example, the author of John, is a master at the double entendre. He has mountains of these in the text because without the pointing, it can mean various things. And this is utterly lost in the Greek. For example, just a quick example is chapter 20. Mary is looking for Jesus. And of course, as everybody knows, she says in Greek, Kyrie, Kyrie, Lord, Lord, or Master, Master, if you prefer, because I don't like the medieval implications. But in Greek, in Galilean Aramaic, what she is saying is Mari, Mari, which of course is a homonym for her name. Jesus walks up behind her, Mari. Is he saying her name, or is he saying, you too are a master like me because I'm about to check out? There's a double entendre there of incredible power. I probably have about 20, 30 pages just on this conversation in John 20:16 of no more than 2 words which are identical. And they come up again in what Thomas says at the end of chapter 20. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. The Galilean Aramaic, which has been completely overlooked by pretty much everybody, even the best Aramaic scholars out there, they only look at the Syriac, and that is a grave mistake.
James, how will we get your book?
How long is my book?
How will we get your book? How will we buy your book?
It's going to be coming out soon. I just finished the text editing. I now have to do the pagination, margins, indices, things like that. My publisher is a Panamanian publisher, so obviously it falls on the English speaker to do all this.
On the Talpiot tomb, there is an ossuary. Presumably, some people suggested that the occupant was Mary Magdalene. And
this is James Tabor's
the name there, it uses Miriamne, and it uses the same spelling as was used in one of the
in the Acts of Philip.
In the Nag Hammadi library, where reference to Miriamne.
It's in the Acts of Philip and others, yes.
Yeah, it used the proper spelling, which wouldn't have been known when the New Testament was written, edited later on. This was evidence of the early usage of the proper spelling. And then it has a word written in Greek, but it's not a Greek word. It's an Aramaic word. It says Mara. Yep. And I would assume that means master or teacher. The same. So she was given that authority as being a teacher or a master. And we got the modern equivalent of Mar. For like Mar Samuel and so in the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox churches.
Here's the thing on that. I've talked with Tabor a great deal about this.
I can hardly hear you. Sorry.
I've spoken with Tabor about this ossuary a bunch of times because it's one of his bags is this ossuary. But on the subject of the name Mariami, here's the thing: the Hebrew name Miriam, of course, goes way back. It goes right back to who, Moses' relative Miriam. But that with the final M or mu, if you prefer, is a Hebrew name, also an Aramaic name. But Mary wasn't of that name. By my research, especially in the Talmud, she was paternally of Sheban ancestry. She was her father's family was from northeastern Africa, and in that language, Mary is a completely different name without the final M. She was evidently the first person of note in the Holy Land to carry this name, and I can think of her name, Elon. Oh golly, a Jewish scholar woman, Elon. It'll come to me. She did a multi-volume study of the use of Hebrew names, for example, in tombstones and other texts, organized by time. There is no example of the name Mary without the final M up until after Mary. So she introduced that name. So what you're pointing out in the Greek there without the M, that is significantly important. This name, Mary, means my master. The final Y in English we call it a Y. The final Y is the genitive suffix, and it means my. So my master. And this is an extremely important point because this comes up in who is the apostle of the apostles, who is the beloved disciple. In the Greek, we don't have the gender suffixes that Aramaic has in abundance, especially Galilean Aramaic, but they're there in Galilean Aramaic, and the beloved disciple is indisputably female. No question.
Makes sense. It makes sense. And there is the tradition that Jesus used to kiss Mary.
Yeah.
So the idea that and the idea that Jesus had a wife makes sense, especially with the later rabbinic traditions being applied to him, perhaps. Yeah.
Notice that Paul, to get back to Paul for a moment, Paul says, well, the other guys have wives, so why can't I have my sister wife along with me to take care of me? And he very carefully avoids, if Jesus had not had a wife in that passage, Paul certainly would have said, it is better for you to be like Jesus and me and not have a wife.
Right,
but he doesn't mention Jesus.
Yeah. Plus, there's a tradition in Qumran, and once again, I go back to the Qumran Messianic movement to double check which parts would be most historical. And their teacher of righteousness never revealed himself publicly until he had an heir. So they always had to have an heir, because the Dead Sea Scrolls, they said that there would always be a teacher of righteousness until the Messiah of righteousness shows up. That there would always be a teacher of righteousness. So this messianic figure, he couldn't make himself available to the public until he had an heir, because he couldn't take the chance that the line would be stopped. You catch the guy who's out there in public and he hasn't had an heir yet, then you're going to have broken your duty, because they took that not only as a promise but as a command.
What you're treading close to, Chris,
always have them available. The son of David. I should teach you. They'd always have a son of David on the throne of Israel until the Messiah of righteousness comes. There'd be a son of David on the throne, and so he always had to have an heir before he went public. And so Jesus, naturally, he went public, must have had an heir. It makes sense that the tomb actually would fail to be a possible candidate for Jesus's tomb if it didn't have an heir. Yeah, so the idea that it has an heir, and that the heir is the name given to the heir as well, matches, I think, the name of Jesus' historical father. I think Jesus named his son after his father. So I think Jesus was the son of Judah the Galilean, the historical Jesus. I think he was.
In the Galilean Aramaic of Gospel of John.
Fits timing, and it also fits another thing. The Dead Sea Scroll community, they treated Judah the Galilean as their king, and Josephus said that Judah the Galilean had royal pretensions. Well, if Jesus was tied to the community at Qumran and was treated as the heir to the throne, then he had to be the son of Judah the Galilean, because Judah the Galilean was the heir to the throne according to that community the generation before. And we know how monarchies work. So that makes sense to me. I can't prove it, but the evidence there is so suggestive that I think it's compelling.
Yeah,
what about John? Your gospel?
Galilean Aramaic suggests in the Last Supper discourse, Jesus speaks of a woman who is pregnant and the pain of delivery, and then she'll be rejoicing thereafter. In the Galilean Aramaic, he is speaking of someone who's there in the room. This woman here is pregnant, and when she gives birth, and I think it's Mary. Mary is referred to, I forget which chapter in Acts, I think it's 12, as the mother of John Mark. And Clement of Alexandria refers to John Mark as the first in their line of Coptic popes. And his chair, which we discussed in another episode, Jacob will remember, and his chair is a part of this issue. It also, all of this connects up with the matter of the Melchizedekian order.
Yes.
Because there's a number of indications in the Galilean Aramaic, once again, that Jesus was of the Melchizedekian order and Mary in Samaria. And that their marriage, therefore, you could say, was a state marriage. The separation of Samaritans and Jews, which at that time, of course, was very unpleasant, that they were uniting them to, once again, by virtue of their marriage. I know what I'm saying sounds like I'm out on the lunatic fringe, but trust me, in the book, that's why 6,000 pages in the book, I document all this with extreme care.
I support that completely. It makes sense to me from everything that I'm aware of. In fact, I would expect that. So I'm looking forward to your book. In fact, mark me down for a signed copy. How's that? I want a signed copy.
I'm going to get a wheelbarrow and bring it to Panama. All 6,000.
I'm looking forward, but I think we probably covered as much as we can about Paul from the available evidence.
And this is why Paul has such an odium for Mary. If you read Colossians with care, he is vituperating about Mary and, as he sees it, her henchman, John the Presbyter, throughout the letter. And he is determined to liberate Jesus from these two evil people, John and Mary. He refers to her in, I forget which I think it's 2 Corinthians, as having sexual interest in dead bodies because of her reportage of what she saw at the tomb. He is horrible to her. However, Clement of Alexandria, once again, after Paul is not executed but exiled from the empire, because that's what he got as a citizen, Paul goes out through the Pillars of Hercules, i.e. Gibraltar, and according to Clement, he finally, for the first time, comes face to face with Mary. And by Clement's description of the meeting, which is fascinating, he broke down in tears, ashamed with tears for all that he had ever said, vituperating about Mary over the decades. And she, in this blessed moment that literally brings tears to my eyes, she forgives him and loves him. It's very near the end of his life, and this, for me, finally saves Paul in my mind from utter enmity. I have such love for what Mary did for him out of love that I can forgive Paul for all the rest.
Well, you're more gracious than me.
I'm an old pastor. Charles Worth said the same thing on this program a while back. Well, I'm an old pastor. I can't help it.
Well, maybe we should talk about the proofs that he's an Herodian. We've talked about whether he's a Roman agent. Is there any dispute that he was an Herodian on your guys' part?
No, I mean,
I don't
Paul
think
says
so.
my relative Herodian. I think that's conclusive right there. That wouldn't have been left in the tradition if that was something that couldn't be supported.
There's another passage that I don't know if you guys have seen it. Can I control this, Jacob?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, we're using the share. I pulled up the share screen.
Okay, I think I have to. It's not. How do I change pages? I don't seem to be able to do that.
There's arrows on the bottom. It's arrows on the bottom right of your PowerPoint. You see that?
Bottom arrows of the PowerPoint down here.
Bottom right. Bottom right.
Way down the bottom.
It's all the way to the bottom right.
Black bar.
Below the black
bar. It's below the black bar, Doug.
It's on the gray bar.
It's on the gray bar. I don't see the
on the gray bar on the bottom. You're not low enough.
Oh, you know what? I can see now.
There you go. Down there.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So now
the arrow keys on your keyboard should be able to move it to the right.
But it's not. When I roll it or
hit the arrow key on the keyboard.
Oh, the keyboard. Okay.
Yeah.
You're in Windows, yes.
All right. Well, it's not working. Anyway, I was going to just say we could take a look at Acts 13:1. Can you move this? Can you move the slides, Jacob?
No, I can't. Share screen is controlled on your end. Clicking on the arrow, it's all the way in the bottom right.
Your arrow's up too high. There you go, down to the right.
Oh, I see it now. Oh, there it is, way over here.
Yeah,
that's a chat. That's a chat. Oh gosh.
No, it's for slide control.
That's a slide control chat with everyone.
Move to the left. You see the little arrow? The greater, what looks like a greater than sign and a lesser than sign.
Move the greater and lesser. Just move your cursor to the right.
To the right.
Just do what there you go. No, move it to the left. Down.
You know what? Forget it.
There you go. Down on.
All right. Anyway, you know what? We know what it is. It's
I'll put your slideshow. I'll put your slideshow instead of the share screen. That way you can control it.
Okay, so this is mine.
This is the slideshow instead of the share screens.
So the one I had originally had. Okay, so now
uploaded the one you uploaded to StreamYard.
Is it now moving?
No. You don't understand what I'm saying. I put the.
Oh, I see. Oh, wait a minute.
You got it moving.
Now I can control it. Yeah. Here we go. Oops. It went
away.
Okay.
I'm going back to your share screen then, since you moved it.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. Just to be sure we're on the same page. Which one did you just mess with? The StreamYard version?
I went over to my my PowerPoint on my computer, and I thought that would help.
Okay. Go back to where you were a page ago, a couple pages ago.
Oh, you can see it now. Oh, it's working.
Yeah,
it's working.
yeah.
All right.
Okay, so it's great. We're now on the board. Thank you guys for being patient. Okay, so I was going to show. Is this one? It's Acts 13 verse 1. I want to look at that.
I saw you flash by the Imperial Regiment. That was a regiment that was known for its anti-Semitic atrocities.
Oh, really? I'll go back to just let you talk about that. This is the Praetorian Guard. That one? This passage here?
No, I mentioned the
Philippians?
Imperial Regiment.
The Imperial Regiment was
remember Cornelius of Caesarea, the centurion, being such a noble guy converting to Christianity, when in actual fact he was he was a centurion at Caesarea, and the Imperial Regiment at Caesarea was known for going after the Jews and persecuting them. And in fact, Josephus said that their atrocities were so horrible that he wouldn't even list them. Now, Josephus listed all kinds of horrible atrocities going on during the fall of Jerusalem, but he would not describe the atrocities done by Cornelius,
all right, so we're talking about Acts 27 verse 1. You saw this as it went by, right? Yeah. It said Imperial Regiment. Yeah.
Right.
But it's interesting when you go to Mousy, he translates Sebastos as Augustin cohort, which is a special unit within the Imperial Regiment. So the Imperial Regiment, it was an abstraction, but Augustin cohort is the actual group. So I did a little research on that, and so it's a group of guards. And, but they took him on a ship. This Augustin cohort took Paul on the ship. Let's see if we can go back here.
Wow.
And they took him on the ship in Acts. What passage in Acts here? I have it here. Well, actually, this is it. So this group, the Imperial Roman Legion Legio Augusta, had these logos. Okay, these are Pegasus, Mars, and Capricorn. And this is the group that takes Paul on the ship. So what I was trying to point out here is people always point at the Praetorian Guard when he gets there. He's actually treated as a royalty way before that. He's taken by a special ship with this Augustin cohort, top military elite unit. Okay, I mean it's considered the next to the Praetorian Guard. It is next below that. So he's getting the top protection the whole way. He isn't just on a ship that's randomly being driven to Rome. He's on a ship that is especially for top officials of the Roman government. Why is he getting this treatment? That's the question. Is he that great a spy? Is he that great a murderer of Christians and that kind of mission? Or is he the top secret agent you want to get back safely so that nobody gets hold of him and learns all the secrets of what he's doing? We don't know exactly, but he's definitely getting the top treatment. And then you have the Praetorian Guard, right? So here he is in Acts 28. Now he's there, and we now have the chief of the soldiers of the Praetorian Guard, a guy named Clemens, who is mentioned in Philippians 4:3, is that person. And Clemens is actually a well-known person who was the chief of the, he was the prefect of the Praetorian Guard. Marcus Arensinus Clemens, Praetorian prefect under Caligula. And then he overthrew or helped participate in the murder of Caligula and overthrew him to put in Emperor Claudius. And so that's an interesting thing. This Praetorian Guard was like the deep state. They could take out anyone who was offensive to their belief system or whatever it was. But anyway, let me see if I can find that thing I was trying to show you earlier. Because I didn't put in any particular order here. Okay. Now this is, by the way, this is another quote that's interesting. Romans 16:10, salute them which are of Aristobulus' household. Aristobulus is a very unusual name. Maybe sometimes, it's likely we're talking about one of the people connected to the Herodians. So I put an article here on that if anyone's interested.
He's actually a part of the Caiaphas family by my research.
Oh, interesting. So there you go. High priest Caiaphas has Jesus ordered murdered. Paul serving the high priest. What I always, I'm going to, can I do a digression?
He's a friend of Epaphroditus too.
Oh, well, that's a good one.
Yeah, that. Go ahead. You can tell me.
You caught that. I got that in your article this morning, and I put it in my PowerPoint. So I have it in here. I think I had enough time. But he's the Herodotus is the aide to Nero, the personal secretary to Nero.
Exactly.
Is Paul's he calls him a public servant. Paul says he's a public servant, which means a person who works for the public. And a lot of Christian scholars ignore what that really implies. It's the assistant to Nero. Who else could be a public servant that proximate? And he's inside the household of Nero. This is
exactly.
Caesar. So it's beyond doubt that.
And he was also in the next ruling after Nero. He was still functioning in the same role for the next emperor. So.
Okay. So I think this is what I wanted to bring you guys to just comment on. So a lot of people don't get this far to Acts 13:1. So let me set this up a little bit. I'm not the first one who saw it. Eisenman saw it too, but he didn't take the time to look at what I'm going to show you. So this is a statement by Luke. Lucius is his real name, and that means he's a Latin speaker, but he also knew Greek, obviously. And he writes this. But I want you to see something. You guys know that Greek at that time was written in scripta continua, correct? That it has no punctuations.
Right.
Right. It's just letters strung. And my teacher said the only way to read ancient Greek is you have to say it out loud.
Yeah.
So by trying to say it out loud, you will break up the words, and then you'll get the syntax. If you
Right.
So a modern person doesn't do that. So let's read it out loud. And what we need to pay attention to is the very end here. So
Absolutely.
There's no comma over here. Now there we're in the church. What? Yes.
I'm saying that the comma is not in the text itself. Anyways, it's
right. So I grayed it out because it doesn't belong there. So you can just listen. And so if I were reading this in Greek, this is what I would do to try to understand the message. Now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene, and Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. That's
right.
how it would read.
That means that Herod the Tetrarch and Saul and Manaen were all brought up together.
Exactly. And that is what perfectly explains who is his close connection. Meaning,
right.
If Herodian is a son of Herod, this could even be Herod the Tetrarch, because we're talking Herod the Tetrarch is the son of Herod the Great.
Right.
Correct? So it could be the very same person.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, this is why he has such an intimate connection. Now, Herod the Tetrarch is also called, if I'm not incorrect, Herod Antipas, right? Mm-hmm. He's the guy who sent Jesus to be executed.
Antipas was a nasty epithet. It actually means against everybody. It was originally Antipatros, meaning as opposed to his father.
I really, that's what I thought. I was wondering, why would anyone want a name like Antipas? But yeah, I guess I thought maybe your parents didn't like you. They give you a name that you're a
Saul would meaning liar. As long as I'm at it, I'm with Joan Taylor that Luke Acts was probably written by Thecla, which is a very interesting allegation on her part. And I've looked into it, and I think she's got that right. And I mention that because Thecla comes up in the Caiaphas house, where, as you may recall, she's apparently part of the Caiaphas family. Caiaphas is the name of the family, not the guy.
Right.
And Barnabas is another name for Joseph Caiaphas. So you have him there. Simeon called Niger, and Lucius of Cyrene. Well, where's that? You got it. Northeastern Africa. So they are part of this continuum as well. So that sets up now Manaen, which had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch and Saul. In other words, you got some opposition there.
Interesting. Okay. So but we're all in agreement that this means that he was raised with Herod the Tetrarch, Herod Antipas, the guy who ordered, send this guy back to Pilate. I'm not going to deal with him. You let him take care of him. But with a crown of thorns on his head and blood dripping on his garments. So the message was clear. Get rid of this guy, right? So how close is Paul, to the killer of Jesus Christ, the real killer, not the Jews, the real killer, the real decision makers who didn't and were zealous or jealous of Jesus' aspirations to be Messiah, or other people to think he's the Messiah. I mean, it's obvious that's what he was raised in, an environment that was not just pro-Rome, not just pro-Herod, but actually pro the killing of Jesus in anticipation of his death. In other words, Paul may never have met Jesus, but his goal would have been to see Jesus die if he even knew anything about it. So the movement he belonged to was not a Jewish groups of, let's say Pharisees coming after Jesus. And even though he claimed he was a Pharisee, I see very little evidence he really is a Pharisee, but whatever. His position at the time Jesus is dying and being killed is he's on the side of this guy, his brother, or, guy he's raised with. He's not, that's where he sits. And that's why I'm very convinced he's absolutely a hypocrite. He can play both sides at the same time. And if you actually read his writings, he contradicts himself about his doctrine of salvation.
It depends on his audience.
So watch this. In Romans 2, verse 7, he says, how do you have eternal life? Those will have eternal life who by good works, not well doing, as the King James says, but who by good works do good works will receive eternal life. That's in Romans 2:7. When he gets to Romans 4, you're now saved by faith alone. Abraham was saved or justified by faith alone. So you are going to be saved by faith alone, blah, 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 blah. So he's got two opposite messages in the same thing. Why do I say that? Because this is what people who are trying to infiltrate a group with an insincere message. He has one message that he believes in. Which one is it of the two? The old one, the traditional one, which is you're saved by, justified by good works, as James says in 2:24, or is it the message he gives us in Romans 4? How do we know? And this is what this is a skill called sophistry.
Paul says, I'm all things to all people. To the Gentiles, I'm a Gentile. To the Jews, I'm a Jew.
Yeah, as I said earlier, he's a chameleon.
He's basically, I am whatever I need to be for the occasion, and I'm really none of those things.
Exactly.
But I'll play whatever role I need to play.
Exactly. He's a chameleon. He changes his colors.
But we always assume he's limiting it, he's not fooling us. He's telling us the real scope.
One of the few truthful things he said was, with the Jews, I'm a Jew. With the Gentiles, I'm a Gentile, etc., etc. That was at least truthful, that he presents himself however he thinks he needs to for his audience.
But the question is, my question is, when he says he's a Christian, the Christ that I follow, I don't know your faiths exactly, but if he's saying to me he's following Christ, what Christ? I have to say, because your message is
Christos.
Yeah, right.
That's the big question for me.
Christus was a good omen, right?
Yeah, I mean, the earliest texts actually have Christos more often than Christos. Christos comes out of the conferences.
Christos comes out of the Nicene conference.
Yeah, Nicene began the whole thing. Yeah.
So they started calling him
Christos is a later dogmatic invention that replaces Christos.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
Well, it seems that Paul was rewriting everything from the original movement too, and making it the pro-Roman equivalent. For example,
the Pauline religion.
Say that the Mebeker, the overseer of their camp, was put in place by God. So you're supposed to honor the Mebeker because he was assigned his position by God. Yeah. Then Paul comes along and he says you got to honor the emperor because he's assigned his position by God. Yeah. So what the original Messianic movement was saying about their overseer is what Paul was saying about his overseer, the emperor. So he's basically twisted it around, and notice the on the text on the screen right now, the denigrating use of the term the Jews. It's like even as they have of the Jews, and once again it's like the us versus them type of thing, and Paul puts the Jews into the them category, not the us category. Paul's not aligning with the Jews. He's standing in opposition to the Jews. In fact, he goes so much more to put the offensive, the Jews who killed the Lord Jesus, and how much anti-Jewish, anti-Semitism has come down through the centuries because of those words in the Bible.
Right here, yeah. So this is where I was quoting earlier, and this actually says in Greek, the Jews at the end here, they please not God and are the enemies of all mankind, if you translate it literally.
Right,
of course,
right.
So but no, you can't soften it. It's so bad, no matter what you say, and it's a complete hatred of all people of a certain race. I mean, come on, and the people that God said Abraham would bless these people. So you're saying they're cursed. He actually does say they're cursed in another passage.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm with the lame Pagels. Jesus was not killed. He wanted to die. He chose to die.
Right. It was a voluntary death.
Jesus wasn't a traitor. As Pagels never gets tired of pointing out, the word in Greek means handed over. And Jesus wanted him to do this. This is made very clear in John 13 that, what you need to do quickly because night is coming. Get it done. He wants this done. And so all this argument about
he wasn't murdered by them. He sacrificed himself.
All of it is a setup for a different religion.
Right.
Along with the Trinity, along with the incarnation, all of this business is coming out of Paul, and it is not from Jesus.
Right.
Right. Let me see if I can show you one more thing. So here's the I wasn't the first one to notice this about First Thessalonians. The way Eisenman said it is it closes the door to the Jews. In other words, the Christians now will have to separate completely from the Jews. Divide in impera. Remember I said that earlier? Wow. Divide and conquer. This is Roman strategy 101. He's playing it to the perfect T. I believe these could have even, sometimes I wonder, his writing is completely ingenious if you really study him carefully. I mean, he knows all about Plato, Socrates, obscure quotes from different plays and different things. And nowadays we are seeing that it could have been a team of writers assisting him to corrupt us, to corrupt Christianity. I mean, so I don't think these were accidental words. These were all carefully crafted words. And this is how Eisenman puts it. When we turn to James 5:6 accusation against the rich for killing the just one. So James is saying the ones who were against Jesus were the wealthy and the powerful. Well, that could be the Herodians, right? But then Paul turns around, 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 14 and following, the accusation is against the Jews. It's killing the Lord Jesus and turning themselves into the enemies of the whole human race. I mean, that's evil. He virtually closes the doors against Jews. Well, I would put that's putting it mildly, Mr. Eisman. But I wanted to show you one more thing. I did Muslims don't have a nice view of Paul here, just so you know. I tried to find out when did this first happen. So they first started going after Paul in the 700s, and I'm not even sure what their motivation was for at the time, but they did. They were. All I know is the Ebion had come to move into their community as the Naziri, and there's 4 times a reference that the Naziri were permitted to observe their own religion and not have to follow Islam. Just so you know,
they are the Nozarim.
Nozarim, thank you. Yeah. But here's the interesting thing I found in this video or audio tape or audio file: the early Muslim views of Apostle Paul, origins and implications. And Rashi actually blames Paul for creating a division between Christians and Jews. See, he even sees what I'm saying. Yeah. The commentator Rashi, Jewish commentator, French Jew who died in 1105, and in his commentary, this is the speaker speaking on the Babylonian Talmud. He gives this comment because Israel was in distress because of the trickers of Jesus. Paul, quote, Paul created nonsense for them in order to keep them apart from them, to keep the Jews apart from them, to keep the Jews apart from the Christians, the people, and to remove them from Israel. That is to protect Jews and Judaism. So he was saying that Paul's effect was to separate Jews and Christians, and so that the Jews would no longer have the protection of the Christians, because that's a large segment of the Jewish people are now defecting over to Christian, Jewish Christianity, but by dividing them up and then making Gentiles separate themselves away from all of those, it weakened the protection of the Jewish people against the Roman Empire, and that's exactly what divide in impera means. And even though Rashi didn't cite the divide impera principle, but he's telling you the effect was to divide and conquer. And this is what he was saying. That's why the Romans you know, were that was their strategy. Bringing in a guy like Paul would fit their strategy and their what do you call it? Their operating
Modus
principle.
operandi.
Modus, thank you. That is modus
Modus
operandi.
operandi.
Yeah.
And
Paul is
this
also doing the switching thing again. He's always transforming things. We talked about the warrior Messiah is transformed into the peaceable kingdom. Instead, the original divisions between the Jews and the Romans, a lot of it stemmed from the class struggle. The rich were in charge and the poor were suffering. The lower priesthood were even denied their tithes by the higher priesthood, the Roman appointees.
right.
So it was very much the poor versus the rich. And in fact, Jesus' sect labeled itself Ebionim, the poor. So, and then Jesus supposedly said to the rich man, who is a devout Jew, you're doing all the Torah stuff. That's good. The only thing you lack is to join up with the poor, give everything you have to the poor. And that's the method used by the Dead Sea Scroll community again. The Messianic movement did live communally. So they did give everything to their sect, which was called the poor, amongst other names. They also called themselves Nazarene or Nazarene, the keepers of the covenant. So the poor versus the rich was very much the big dominating power dynamic in the lifetime of Jesus. Yeah. And it stayed so right up into the Jewish War. The Jewish War was very much motivated by this power struggle of the rich versus the poor. And in fact, when the war was fully engaged, the Jews burnt down the Herodian palaces, and they destroyed the debt records in Jerusalem, so that anybody who owed debts to anybody, there's no longer a record of it.
And they also destroyed the grain
now no longer had to worry about the oppressive debts that had built up.
According to the Talmud, they also destroyed the grain storage that was there in case of famine.
Yeah.
In order to take money away from the rich.
Exactly. So once again, Paul has changed the story here. He's made it, instead of the poor versus the rich, he's made it Jew versus Gentile.
May I? You referred earlier to the Quran, to the Muslim perspective on Paul. Yes. This is another thing I cover in my book, because another woeful gap in Christian studies, New Testament studies, is the evidence from the Quran, only a few centuries later. And if in the Quran, as for example, as you know, the Quran says, do not say three. It's very anti-Trinitarian. And Paul was the first to erect the edifice that has in it the temple to Jesus as God incarnate. And for Muhammad and for Muslims, this is horrible. And so this is their odium for Paul in a word. Paul's deification of Christ, by implication, makes Paul his greatest and humblest disciple, almost deity himself. So this was Paul's modus operandi in operation.
Okay. So you're saying that their motivation about Paul was because he supports a deity of Christ.
He started it.
Mm-hmm.
He started it. So he was enemy number one for Islam. Theologically, I don't mean enemy number one in the sense that they wanted to get him. I have nothing like that.
It's just the only thing about that is it's odd to me, because if you read carefully Colossians 1:15-17, he says the Father, Jesus is the prototokos of the Father. He's the firstborn of creation, period. Then it says, and from him, meaning Jesus, all things were made and nothing was made that he didn't make. Yeah, if you keep reading, Christ. It's very clear. You got to read all the way to 20 and you'll see it's Jesus. So, but he never actually says Jesus is God. But I always say, if you say he's the creator of heavens and earth, how could he not be God?
He treads very close to that. And obviously he's being extremely careful with his cards in his hand, because if he actually says Jesus is God, he's going to alienate some of his people. But if he doesn't say it, he's going to alienate others. So as usual, Paul, who is a genius with wordplay, he's dancing very carefully in this Terpsichorean theology that he has. He's saying whatever whatever the
Well,
audience needs to hear.
you can see where the theology led to by how the Gospels developed. And by the time you get to John's Gospels, you got Jesus saying, "Before Abraham was, I am." So you have Jesus claiming divinity right there in the Gospels.
But that too is another smoke in the Aramaic.
Can you tell us what that is in Aramaic?
I cannot emphasize enough the vast differences between the Greek Textus Receptus of John and the Galilean Aramaic.
So is that passage though still in the?
I didn't catch your full comment on that. What were you saying about that?
Me,
James? Yeah.
What I should maybe lean closer in case you can't hear me.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is there's a vast difference between the Galilean Aramaic and the Greek Textus Receptus of before Abraham was, I am. The same thing in the prologue. The prologue, everybody assumes that Logos is Jesus, and therefore on that basis, that's the pre-existence of the eternal Christ. And if you read the Aramaic, Memra, which is the word in question in Aramaic, doesn't mean Jesus at all. It means more like what Logos actually means in Greek, that the plan, the order that God has in mind for how the universe is going to proceed in its continual creation. It's a different entity entirely, but Paul imposed upon this idea of the eternal Christ, which I just do not find in the original Aramaic. A footnote to what you just said, by the way. The Gospel of John is basically the earliest narrative gospel. And I say narrative because there were sayings gospels before. But it's the earliest narrative gospel. But when John was arrested in 68, it got sent in the hands of Philip to Sinope in Pontus, and it was held there for about 25 years. Oh. And only later came back in the late 90s and was completed as a through text by the previously mentioned Papias of Hierapolis.
Wow,
and
you have such detail.
Only at that time was it published. So what we have is a very early text published late. But there's a great deal of information that Mark Anderson is really good on this, how much there is in John that shows that it is actually an extremely early witness that only was published late.
Wow. That's news to me. That's very good. I can't wait for your book. Is this going to be explained in a preface?
I'll have to read your book and
please add a preface.
That one. To be fair.
Yeah, I've got 3 prefaces: a general preface, a scholar's preface, and a layperson's preface.
Okay. Good. So is that 1,000 of the 6,000 pages? I'm just teasing.
I'm not.
Don't count. Don't try to count. No.
I don't know.
So here's a fun one.
I lost your video, Doug. I don't know if you turned it off on purpose.
No, I did not. I was actually moving the slide one over. So the slide didn't show up?
No, the slide is there. I said I don't see your webcam turned on.
Oh, I didn't turn it off. I don't know what happened. Let me see. Here, I'll start up again. Let's see. There
we go.
Okay. So I guess it can do that on its own. So this is another little fun fact. This is Acts 23, and he's sent to Felix. So this is an intermediate judge, I think, in Caesarea, to go to Caesarea. So the order was prepare 200 soldiers. How insignificant Paul must be as a prisoner. Prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on, and bring him safely to Felix, the governor. I mean, who is this guy? Is he just a no-name person? He's not on any. See, this is why I can't believe there's any doubt that he's an Herodian agent, guys, because there is no way on God's green earth that anybody gets this kind of level of protection and any imaginable worth, unless he's known to be a Roman agent of very important significance. If he was given 10 guys, that would have been enough. This is an army. He's literally being protected by an army. Yeah. And like I said, and then he gets on a ship where the elite, the second elite, most elite unit, the Augustan cohort, takes him to Rome, where the Praetorian Guard takes over. And Praetorian Guard is not supposed to protect regular prisoners. Only Caesar gets that. How did this guy rank to get the Praetorian Guard?
Jesus is arrested and taken before his trial by, what, a handful of soldiers?
Right.
Yeah. Paul gets literally the royal treatment. Who is this guy? That's a good question.
Yeah, it's beyond. And see, I'm an attorney, so you'd have to say, if I was presenting this to a jury, what explanation can explain why this guy's getting 1,000 times the level of protection than anyone else would have, but from the most elite units at every stage once he's been arrested in Caesarea, which is an outlying part of the empire. Why? It must be he is part of a unit or mission that is so important, we have to protect him at all costs. There's no doubt that's what is going on. It's an absolute, he has to be part of the Roman agenda somehow. And then this is the thing, it's right there. Now, one thing I want to say about Acts, just so I can interject my thought on this, because a lot of people assume that Acts is all pro Paul, but it really isn't. What it is, well, a guy named Human in 1720 wrote an article, which is still true to this day. And then Mr. Mauck wrote a book called In Defense of Paul. Both of them coincidentally concluded the same thing. And I think I can prove to you in 5 minutes. The book of Acts is not written for Christians. Never was intended for us to read it, because there's things that are preposterously biblically false right in it. And I'll tell you what it is in Acts 17 in a second. So what is it? It's an appeal brief to a most excellent Theophilus. That's how you would address the assistant magistrate who serves Nero on all appeals, and basically the decision maker. Okay, he tells Nero what to do. Typically, in this case, probably the whole thing was all set in stone, no matter what. But anyway, Luke doesn't know that. He doesn't know what's going to happen. So he's writing this, and the book of Acts ends 2 years before the appeal's actually heard. Paul wins this appeal that's mentioned by Jerome and Eusebius, okay? And it's a myth that Paul had a return visit to Rome where he gets killed. That's a 4th century myth. He dies a natural death in Spain, according to 1 Clement chapter 5, verse 5. And that is a famous letter predating 70 AD. So basically you've got Paul is and now I've lost my thought again. But he's definitely not serving anybody but Rome in his mission to in Judea. He's definitely being protected and being guarded by the top elite forces. So this is, just to get back to Acts 23. So he is guarded by an enormous army, literally. They could probably take a whole town, like the whole country could be controlled by this one unit. So I think they drained everything off. Think about what they've done. They drained everything off to protect one guy, to get him from Jerusalem to the city on the shore called in Caesarea. It really is really weird. Let me just show you something else here. And this is the Aratus issue we talked about earlier. I don't know if you want to go over that, Jacob.
Yeah, let's
while you're looking, just a quick footnote. I couldn't agree more. As far as I'm concerned, Luke Acts was written for hire by, and I agree with Joan Taylor that it was Thecla, written for hire by Thecla, and Paul was the one who ordered it. So he speaks often of my gospel, and he's talking about Luke Acts. That said, Thecla, if you do the genealogical research, Thecla was a cousin of Mary Magdalene. She was related to that family. And there's a lot, if you read it with care, especially in the Aramaic behind it, there's a lot where it says Paul is wrong, and she supports the Jesus-Mary contingent much more strongly. It's subtle, and you have to read with care, which nobody seems to do anymore. But it's there. Again, that'll be in the book. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you for mentioning that. What I was talking about with Luke Acts.
And before you,
go ahead.
Before you continue, Doug, I just want to Dr. Audlin's point. This is Joan Taylor's book, "The Body in Biblical Christian and Jewish Texts." This is where she talks about her idea of that. Thecla wrote the "we" document of Acts. Yeah. She makes a connection between. I'm trying to get the exact title. Her contribution is titled 2 by 2, the archetypal language of Mark's apostolic pairings. So it starts in page 58 in this book.
Yeah, she hit it dead on the nail as far as I'm concerned. Joan is.
Well, so let me get back to Luke Acts 2, and I'll say yes, that could be very possible that Luke had help. To me, he looks like a lawyer drafting up a appellate brief, both the gospel And I've compared very carefully. Luke does shade quotes that are in Matthew to change things that are more pro-Gentile and less accusatory of Pilate, just so you know. That, so he is an advocate, and he's shaping things. So, I believe he's a very trustworthy gospel, but he is at the end particularly shaping it a little bit more and finding more statements that would help a Roman reader. A most excellent Theophilus is a magistrate judge, according to the study done recently by Mr. Malk. So, but I want to prove to you why I can prove Luke Acts was never written for Christians. Acts 17, what does Paul say? He says, God does not live. He tells the Stoic philosophers at Athens, God does not live in temples made of human hands. That is biblically false. Absolutely, there's been false for centuries. God does dwell at the temple of Jerusalem made by human hands. Jesus even uses those exact words. He says, you cannot swear by the temple at Jerusalem. The temple, he then says, was made by human hands. That's Jesus' own words. Paul contradicts Jesus. That's beside the point. Every Christian knows it's impossible you could ever say this. God does not dwell in temples made of human hands. Now, the reason this was core of the whole case, Paul's case, people forget. If you look carefully at Acts 21, Paul was accused by the Jews of Asia who were there at the temple, saw what happened. Trophimus enters into the temple, defiles it in an uncircumcised state. Trophimus was his friend. Luke said they assumed that Paul had brought Trophimus past the middle wall of separation because of the fact they'd seen him earlier in Jerusalem. So these are all details you have to read and pick it out carefully. So Trophimus is the bad guy. He's done something wrong. Can Paul be blamed for it? Is this whole case, will he be guilty of somebody entering a temple because the Jews have this feeling that God actually dwells in that temple? And if you enter and cross over this area uncircumcised, you have defiled the temple. And God says, I will destroy my temple unless you purify it, by a whole bunch of stuff. So what I'm getting at is no Christian in his right mind who actually processes this in Acts 17 would ever say, this can't be meant for us. Paul just proved he doesn't know anything. He's a liar, or he's stupid biblically. God, of course God dwells at this temple made of human hands. And you're saying he never does that. He says he does not live in temples made of human hands. Now, what's really going on is that's the core issue in the case. Is the Roman judge, the magistrate judge, a pagan, is going to go, why do these Jews think God dwells in temples? Our gods live on Mount Olympus. They come down and they dwell and they're listening to us while we're eating and praising them, but they leave immediately. They don't have this burning lamp, okay, in the era of Christ. They did not have burning lamps with God's spirit, from Apollo living there. No, their gods stayed at Mount Olympus, would visit only for mealtime and then be gone. And so they don't have temples. They don't have temples where their gods dwell consistently. But the Jewish religion was the opposite. That's where God dwells. And there's a lamp that keeps lit that reflects his presence. So Paul doesn't know this. So no way could Luke have been telling this for us, Christian, me as a Christian, to believe this guy, because it's so apostate. It's so over the edge. It's crazy. Now, but why is he doing it? To win an appeal, because this is the core issue. Since Paul said it, since it's a quote of a Roman Stoic philosopher, it's all good. This will get Paul off the hook. This could have been the actual provision or language that caused Paul to win the appeal. So remember, I'm a lawyer, and I look at things like why would somebody quote this passage? How would it help you win? It's the core issue. Did Trophimus actually defile the temple? If God doesn't even dwell there, it doesn't defile anything, right? It'd be a non-effective. It would have no consequence to God. He doesn't dwell there. Somebody walks in uncircumcised. Who cares? But I think you all agree that that's not the God presented in the Bible. He says, I dwell in that temple. And if you come in there uncircumcised, and I think it's Ezekiel 31 or something in there, it's, you've committed an abomination. I will destroy my temple if you don't clean it up. I
only agree in part, just so you know. Let's
hear.
Yeah, I disagree as far as the Pauline movement. Yes, what you're saying is absolutely true. As far as mainstream Judaism, Judean Judaism, yes, you're absolutely correct. That's what generally the prophets assert. However, in the Samaritan tradition that Jesus seems to be very close with, and the apostolic tradition represented by the disciples who actually knew him, it's another matter. And that is the third temple issue. The temple not made with human hands, which is a different temple entirely. It's especially evident in the Johannine works that what we're talking about is a temple that is represented by the teachings of Jesus. It's a spiritual temple. And in that sense, yes, God does live in it. Because for John, as you know from 1 John 4, verse 8, God is love. And for him, the drawing together of opposites into unity, as he does at the resurrection with Mary, this is evidencing how love draws together. This is the manner to build the third temple. These first and second temples are completely to the contrary of what the Torah commands, which says altars to God shall not be built with dressed stones that have been cut with iron tools. And there they are making dressed stone temple. It further says clearly, we have this not only in the Samaritan Torah, but we have this as well in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Charlesworth found it, that the temple, that the tabernacle is to be located at Gerizim, Har Gerizim, in Samaria, not in Jerusalem. That was a political decision by David for obvious reasons. So it's completely to the contrary of the Torah. And actually, I'm kind of more or less on the side of Paul on this one, because the apostolics were saying it's not the temple in Jerusalem, and it's not for that matter the tabernacle in Gerizim. Jesus says this himself in John 4, but rather a different temple altogether. And in that sense, Paul more or less is right, although I think what he's doing is he's taking an idea from the apostolic Christians and adapting it to his own uses.
All right, can I comment?
Yeah, please.
All right, so I don't really have to disagree with any of that, because all you're saying in this sense, I can agree that God dwells in heaven. God can dwell in a future temple. Okay, these are permissive possibilities, but Paul erased any possibility that God dwells in temples made of human hands. So it's the importance of the negative that people miss. God does not dwell in temples made of human hands, excluded, therefore, any temple that you see in Jerusalem that the light is burning. And then also, it's also,
I agree with what you're saying.
Okay, so that's why I say there's no way on God's green earth that Luke intended Christians to read this. Now you're going to say, well, what about all the stories of the apostles getting together? Look at what it depicts Paul as: a complete, not only just you and I would say he's a chameleon, but to a Roman officials who really believe that morality is the core of the Roman way. You've got to have a mores. Mores is key and functional of everything. And it's good for the state. People behave in good ways, right?
Yeah, the genius of the emperor. Yes.
Right. So they're all in favor of, the value system of Christianity, if it's on the right path and so on. So all I'm saying is that he's not helping. The book of Acts is not intended to promote Paul to us. In fact, it exposes Paul's lying all the time. Yeah. For example, in Acts 26, Paul says, I preached, tells King Agrippa, and I think Festus is there at the same time. This is a judicial proceeding. He's under oath, obviously. And he says, you know what? I've been teaching a gospel, a message of works worthy of repentance. That's what the words are, works worthy of repentance. How in the world could you and I accept this if we had read any of Paul's letters? Is Luke completely really unaware of Paul's letters? Apparently, most scholars say the only explanation why he can say what he says in Acts 26, also in Acts 24:14, where Luke says, Paul says, I believe in all points that are according to the law and the prophets. Well, that's mysterious. That does not fit the Paul we know of his epistles. So either Luke has been conned by a chameleon, or he is very aware of what's going on, but he has to put on a best face possible for the church. Because if Paul loses this appeal, what's going to end up happening? Christianity will be outlawed, potentially, because a leading member, had his friend defile the temple by Trophimus defiling the temple and going through the middle wall of separation. That could be a very devastating impact, and a blowback on Christianity could be outlawed as be an illicit religion. So Luke is doing everything he can to present Paul in the best light possible, but in Acts 21, he does leave a little door open for the original church to say, hey, we had no idea. We gave him this instruction to do something lawful and, follow the law. And then it all backfires on us. And we even told him, this is how you can prove to people you keep the law, and all this rumors that you're an apostate. Apostasia is the word there and used in Greek. Paul, we've heard you're guilty of apostasia. You can prove to others they're not by doing what we tell you, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. And James gives Paul these instructions. So this is all intended for Roman audiences, Roman pagan people. That's even why the story of Dionysius is in there in Acts 9:26. You can't kick against the pricks. Why would Luke include that for a Christian audience? He knows Roman religion. He knows Zeus, Apollo religion, right? He's not a dummy. I would say he's one of the most educated, erudite men of that time period. He knew Greek. He knew Latin.
He went to the Malseon. He studied at the Malseon. So yes, he was very erudite, no question.
And what's interesting about him is he was very, if you read Eusebius's work called The Teachings of the Apostles, it was found and reprinted in the 1890s. It was lost for centuries, and it's very interesting. Luke is considered a confidant of the 12, and they treat him as like one of their own. So he's super smart. They gave him this mission. You got to help protect us. Put in there a little bit of, hold on. Somebody's trying to call me. So you got to do something to protect us. Put in a little bit about, we told Paul to do this to prove that he was obeying the law. We had no idea he was going to go violate, his friend was going to go violate the middle wall separation. And I want to add one more thing. Christianity could easily have lost that case. It had the letter to the Ephesians ever come out into the case. So people say, well, this was an easy win. No, it wasn't. Because in the epistle to the Ephesians, Paul tells the Ephesians, and Trophimus is a member of the congregation of the Ephesians. Even Luke tells us that. Trophimus is from Ephesus. And Paul, in the letter to the Corinthians, says, Jesus has done away with the enmity between us and the law and ordinance have been taken away, including, guess what he says? Including the middle wall of separation. And many Christians don't know what that means. It immediately is talking about the temple's middle wall that Herod himself put in there to protect the temple or create a court of the Gentiles. You could not cross that middle wall. If you did, you were defiling it. So it was just stay on this side of the wall and everything will be fine. Paul told the Ephesians, you can go past, that wall doesn't even exist anymore. It's been taken away. If that got in the front of the court in Rome and they saw that, we would lose. Christianity would lose, because you had a guy writing this stuff and telling people they could cross that middle wall, and Paul would be guilty too. But even the Romans would have a difficult time letting him go. Because, hey, you told this very man, you preached the message, this sermon was earlier than this time period, that he could go past that middle wall. You're going to have to pay the penalty. So there was a big risk here. So this was not a little matter, and it deserved writing a full gospel out for most excellent Theophilus, going to the lengths of providing all this information about the early church to paint the original church in the best light possible, because that also comes through. James looks like he's doing his job. This is not, and the Jews are zealous for the law, which the Romans are okay with. As long as you're zealous for the law and not to overthrow us, we're cool with that. We want to do sacrifices at your temple, but we're respecting your views, and we're putting up a sign saying you can't cross the middle wall separation. That's okay. We're going to do all that. But so that's why I think Paul would be in trouble. He went too far. He said something in a letter I don't think he was authorized to do, that the middle wall separation was gone, because the Romans had put up the law that said no person could cross this middle wall of separation in an improper state, Gentile state of uncircumcision. So, I mean, that's why I think it's overwhelmingly clear this could not have been written for Christians, because we would have known these epistles eventually. We would know everything Paul said in his testimony about believing in a gospel of works-worthy repentance, and he believes in all the law and the prophets, Acts 24:14 and Acts 26:23, I think it is. We would laugh at it. We would be, this is preposterous. So Luke is not thinking we're ever going to be able to compare these texts against Paul's writings, and he was trying to win from the Romans. That's my view.
If we think of the author of Luke Acts as a defense attorney hired by Paul, and if Joan is right, and I think she is, that it's just Thecla most likely, then we have a situation I mentioned before. Thecla was part of the high priestly family, the Caiaphas family. So you have someone hired by Paul as his defense attorney who probably in her heart can't stand the guy. His vituperative nature. So
Interesting.
as I see it, I'm going to use the feminine pronoun because that's what I think. She, the author, is caught between a rock and a hard place. Scylla and Charybdis, if you wish. She has to write this gospel and Acts for hire for Paul, a guy she doesn't believe and doesn't trust because she probably knows better than anybody how he changes his tune depending on the audience, et cetera, everything we've been saying. But she has to write it anyway. So what I think she settles upon, as I said before, is she has all sorts of passages in the book. I delineate them in my book in which if you read between the lines, she is heavily criticizing Paul. This is where I agree with you, Doug. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of criticism of Paul, but it's in disguise. She helps Paul keep the Gentile Christian Pauline movement alive, but at the same time, in her heart, she is really part of the apostolic movement. That's where her heart belongs. That's where her family is part of. And so she's, as I say, she's stuck in the middle. She has to do this, or Paul, it could be, as we all know, in revenge on anybody who he thinks double crosses him, he's horrible, and she doesn't want to risk that. He is her bread and butter.
But couldn't she be doing it with the same motive I'm saying that Luke had if he wrote it, which is he's trying to protect the church, and that means
the Gentile church, the Pauline church.
No, I think he's trying to protect the original core church, the 12, because that's, like I said, Eusebius shows you that Luke was on the inside with the 12 in that teachings of the apostles. So the point is, the
subtle inferences in Luke Acts that Paul is not the authority, and that actually what the genuine apostles, including Mary, are the apostle to the apostles.
You know, and let me add this one more thing. One proof that it can't be Paul controlling the narrative. Paul says,
I think he had right of approval, absolutely.
Well,
but he did not.
Then listen to this. Even Paul would have to go. This is craziness. Paul says when he insults the high priest, he says, and the high priest says you're a liar, or whatever, and he has him slapped, and he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know it was the high priest." When somebody tells him it's the high priest, do you know how preposterous that is? If he works for the high priest, the law mandates the high priest can't even leave his house without wearing the special robe and a gold insignia band around his head. And Paul is telling people with all straight face that he didn't know. Now, Luke theoretically is a Gentile. He probably might not. You could argue he wouldn't know, right? But nobody could write this for an audience of Jewish people, thinking that they're going to believe it. No Jewish person would take that testimony.
That's obviously for a Gentile audience.
It's for Gentiles in Rome who don't know. It has to be exclusively for an audience that does not know that the high priest is wearing this special outfit, and Paul claims to have worked for him. Therefore, it can't possibly be he didn't know, and he lied under oath. Jesus says you can't bear false testimony. Paul would be condemned by Jesus, and he never repents of it, right? So where's he at? Where is he in the end of days if you believe in Jesus' message on salvation? So, but to see that this does not fit the idea that Paul is driving this narrative. It is somebody sculpting this to win a case, even when it's embarrassing if it were known by the true church, the 12. The 12 know all about this. The intimate group has to know about this and has to approve it. But I don't think Paul has to approve it. This is going to be to save the church from Paul's mistake. They know about Paul's. They probably do know about the Ephesians epistle by now. They know it could be the big bomb that would destroy the church. So they're trying to win this case at all costs, make him look as good as possible, but keep a downside risk. It's always called a good idea to keep a downside back option, which is we didn't do anything wrong. We told him in Acts 21 what to do, and we didn't tell him to do this, allow his friend to violate the temple. So that's why I think you can't really seriously defend that this was Paul preparing this. I would put it this way. If he wrote the book, any part of the book of Acts, even the we passages or whatever, he looks so bad. I mean, remember he's told by 4 different people, don't go to Jerusalem. And he says, but my spirit says I have to go. That doesn't put him in a good looking place, does it? The Holy Spirit talked to 3 other people, including Luke. Luke said the Holy Spirit tells me you shouldn't go. But Paul says, but my spirit, you have to read it. They try to translate it wrong.
Yeah.
But my spirit says I have to go. That's selfishness.
Yeah. And
God
he gets
was
tried
telling him,
twice
go,
by
go.
the apostolics, and twice he's found guilty. Twice they disavow any connection with him, and yet he keeps right on going.
Yeah. He's a very selfish person. He couldn't. Yeah. It's too embarrassing to write this story the way it is. And so people say, yeah, it's very pro Paul, but yeah, it's also very realistic about him too, unfortunately, showing his flaws so that maybe the church would be being given some sympathy if somebody figured out what really happened here. Looked at all the facts.
Which adds support to my view that it was a Judean who actually wrote Luke Acts. Thecla.
Oh, okay, well then I can go with that. It's somebody who was Jewish, who was is
stuck
totally
between
trying to protect the church.
Trying to protect the church. This is written for a Gentile audience, clearly, as you were saying, Douglas Lee. A Jew would know right away that it was nonsense, and it made no sense that you couldn't know that he's the high priest. I didn't know he's the high priest. No Jew's going to buy into that story. Similarly, Paul's opposition to the temple is another example of Paul rewriting the original Messianic movement's attitudes and changing them. The original Messianic movement, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, was very much interested in a purified temple. They had criticisms of the temple, but they considered the temple to be valid and that it was the appropriate means of getting closer to God for a Jew. So Paul's standing in opposition to the original Messianic movement once again here. And in terms of things that are in the New Testament that are for a Gentile audience that no Jew from Jesus' own time would have ever bought into, is the story of the temple veil being ripped in two when Jesus died.
I like that part of your article.
This is similar to Paul's idea. This is a gospel writer trying to make Paul's idea that middle veil is now gone. That whole thing of separation of Gentiles and Jews is now the distinctiveness of Judaism no longer has any value according to Pauline theology. So basically, Jews are all Judaism itself is passé according to Pauline theology, and the temple is all passé according to God Himself, who rips the veil in two when Jesus died. But any Jew who was there would know that the veil wasn't ripped in two when Jesus died. It was still in one piece until 70 CE when Titus cut it with a sword.
Yeah, it actually was in two pieces. It was manufactured in two pieces. It was two curtains protecting the Holy of Holies, and they simply separated it.
There you go. So any Jew in the first century would know that the whole ripping of the veil in two was just a nonsense story. It just, and of course that story wasn't written until after the temple had already been destroyed and was a piece of history. So basically, they're writing to an audience that didn't know any better.
That's in the Book of Mark, right?
The people who knew the temple were dead. Most of them, anyway.
Okay. So. Yeah, I found that very it's persuasive in your article. Let's see what else we got here. It's interesting. Paul's sister's son heard of an ambush. Do you remember this in Acts 23:11? So the question is, who is Paul's sister's son? What is that he doing out there in this area? So there's some people who researched this, and they concluded that Paul's sister's son is an Herodian. And if you study a little bit more in depth, they have his name. I think it's Everest. Let me see what I got here.
Evisto.
What is his name?
I've got Evisto in my mind, but I could be wrong.
I think that's it. I have to get that slide. We'll maybe do that another time. But that was it's something SA. I think it's SAMSO. Samso. I don't know what that means, but it was. Let me see if I can find it here. Maybe in this thing. No. Okay, but anyway, he's there's another reference to somebody who's likely Herodian. And then again, here's the Romans 13. We already talked about that. Oh, did you guys know that Paul was a stagehand? This is relevant to him being an Herodian. The word he says he was a Skenopios. Okay. Well, you can even hear the word if you know what it's. The word skena means scene, and then kopios means worker. So he works the scenes in a set of a movie in a theater. And the Herodians were the only people who had theaters in Judea. So they had two, one in Jerusalem and one outside in the Herodian camp. So, and this is actually mentioned in Antiquities, chapter 20.9.4. They did shows every year and spent many tens of thousands of drachma on these things. So the King Agrippa was had this at Caesarea, where Paul, by the way, was being kept for 2 years. So it was right probably near where he had worked on the theaters. He had to make a living somehow, and he admitted he was a Skenopios. Now, what about the constant statement that it was a tent maker? Okay, so let's see about that. Permanent points out in Anthony Thistleton's The Hermeneutics of Doctrine, 2007, on Christian doctrine as dramatic narrative. Thistleton notes that the argument of L.L. Wellborn, the tent maker, is an unlikely translation of Skenopios in Acts 18:3 at page 70. The BDAG, that's the standard Greek lexicon in all seminaries today, points to the better attested use of the word is from context of old comedy in which it denotes a, quote, stagehand or manufacturer of stage properties. So even the BDAG came around to agree that's what it means. And if you research it by looking at non-Christian material, they're called set decorators. So he was a set decorator for the Herodian family. He was a set decorator, and the only person he could have worked for would have been, as a living, is the Herodian family, because they're the only ones who own theaters. So that to me is another close connection between Paul and the Herodians. Anybody ever think about that one?
Nope, that's new to me.
Well, that's the way it goes. We all learn something in time, but it's very clear. I mean, if you know Greek, that skeno.
No, it's correct to Greek.
Yeah, it reads exactly like that. Why would you think it's a tent maker? So I think the people who first came up with that idea were embarrassed by what it meant.
It's the same issue that we have with Jesus was a carpenter.
Well, tecton could also mean
what is a
tecton is a translation of a word that in Syriac means carpenter. Yes, in Aramaic, Galilean Aramaic, the word actually means a student of the Torah.
Oh, really?
Yes, really.
Galilean Aramaic. Okay, that's
Galilean. You can look it up in your Funkin' Wagnalls. This is this.
I believe it.
And so it was translated into Greek more or less correctly, because in the time of the Greek translations we had Syriac. But in Syriac, yes, tecton is an accurate translation. But in Galilean, no.
Can I ask you about that?
For that matter, there was no wood. There was no workable wood in Judea or Galilee that could have been used for somebody to actually have a job, a career as carpenter. There wasn't enough of it.
Yeah, but tecton could also mean stoneworker. So
that's true too.
Mason.
That's true too. But it's the carpenter business that everybody harps on. Yes, right. But that too is Syriac.
So can I ask you about?
Yeah, sure.
Can I ask you about the relationship between Syriac and the Greek New Testament? Do you think that the transmission point went first to Syriac? Let's say it was in Aramaic. Then it went to Syriac, and then it went to Greek? Or did it leapfrog and go from Aramaic to Greek in every case?
That'll be in volume 2. I'll try to give you a brief answer.
Okay.
It's all spelled on the book. But a brief answer is just staying with John, if I may.
Okay.
John wrote drafts of the gospel in Aramaic, Galilean Aramaic. When he was arrested, these, as I said, were sent to Sinope and Pontus, and they came back in the hands of Marcion around the year 98, 99, that area. And John, as I said, was non compos mentis by that point. So Papias translated it into Greek, and he made it a through text. He made some bridge passages to bridge together these various pericopes that were the drafts of John into a through text in Greek, and that then was published. It was later back translated into Aramaic, and here we have several issues. We have Galilean translations, back translations from the Greek. I work with such Palestinian lectionaries, the 3 Palestinian lectionaries, also the Sinaiticus Rescriptus, the Rescriptus Códigos, and others, which are fragmentary Galilean manuscripts. And then the 3 lectionaries that I mentioned are complete, but of course they're in lectionary form. Those all are in Galilean. But then we have the old Syriac translations, which preceded the Peshitta, and those are kind of an abridged. What they say is sometimes close to the Galilean, sometimes close to the later Syriac, the Peshitta. And the Peshitta largely conforms to the Greek. Yes. So there's a complex history of the relationship. It's not a simple yes or no answer. Sorry.
I have a question for you, James, on that. John 7:15 says that Jesus had a reputation as a learned man.
Right.
And that would presumably come from having a father of the same reputation as being a learned man. Now, is it possible that tekton was used as it was an accidental mistranslation, that the original word that may have been applied to Jesus or his father might have been the word nagar in Aramaic as a learned man, and that may have been translated as tradesman, and then went into tekton in Greek as their closest equivalent thing. They may have read nagar as being tradesman, which is an alternative meaning for it.
Correct.
But so you could have a tradesman or a learned man, and they may have trained, he's a nagar, and so in Greek, let's call him a tekton.
Yeah, exactly. You've hit it precisely. You sure you haven't read my book?
Okay.
No, you've hit it precisely. Aramaic, like any other language, changes.
Right.
I mentioned before Beowulf. Most modern speakers of English can't read Beowulf to save their lives, but it's English.
Okay.
And it's the same thing with Aramaic, same thing with Greek. Koine Greek is not like classical Greek or late church Greek. It's a different smoke.
So you're precisely exactly
what happened to turn Jesus into a carpenter. Yeah.
Yeah. So the original attribute may have been learned man, and went from nagar, mistranslated as tekton, and ended up being carpenter.
Yeah.
So the real appellation we want to say is not that Jesus' father was a carpenter, but his father was a learned man.
Exactly. His father also apparently was of Samaritan heritage.
Okay. Well, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Jacob, what do you think? We got a wrap here, or we got it covered, or what? We're going off in every other direction now.
Yeah. I think we can close here. We've been on for like 2 hours and 37 minutes.
Yeah, that's a long thing for people to view.
You may want to split it into 2 programs.
Yeah.
Well, it's a live stream, so it's all going to be on.
I mean, when it's recorded. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I can upload. I can split it in parts later and
just
segments and re-uploads and stuff like that. We'll see.
All right. Well, thank you, Douglas. Thank you, James. Thank you, Jacob.
I thank all 3 of you for joining me today. This was fun. We got to get together again sometime.
Great fun. I'm really delighted to get to know the 2 of you. I appreciate your work. Now I know you personally.
And James, I want a hard copy signed by you of your new book.
Okay, if you pay for the shipping.
Okay, for that.
I've had to get mostly electronic books because to ship a physical book, I don't even have some of my own books. I don't have physical copies of some of my own books because I'm a poor man. I'm a retired guy. I can't afford to ship my own book down here.
Yeah, well, an electronic copy would be kind to appreciated too. So, all right.
Okay. Well, again, I just want to thank all of you. And one more thing, I'll have the links to Dr. Audlin's books in the description below, and also the Christopher Lawson's books and other material below, and also to Douglas Del Tondo's YouTube channel, which is tagged in the description below. So I'll see everybody later. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Hello, viewers. Thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and/or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.